Gonna call this regular select board meeting for December 16th to order at 5:06. Sorry, we're running a few minutes behind already. David had some technical difficulties, but he's with us now. So do you have any adjustments to the agenda, Karen?
I have one. I want to add Energy Committee.
Sorry, there was some interference there. You want to add Energy Committee what?
Energy Committee appointments.
Okay. What items?
Under Select Board items.
Okay.
Mike, can you mute your mic, please?
All right. All right. So let's start with approval of minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes of November 18th, 2020.
November 18th. No, I think it was
Sorry,
actually
I read the wrong thing. December 2nd, sorry.
December 2nd.
December 2nd, 2020.
Second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of December 2nd as presented. Is there any discussion? Since there's no discussion, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that would be unanimous. All right, so let's move on to warrants.
And I'll make a motion to approve and execute the warrants to the treasurer on completion of review.
Second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded to approve and execute the warrants as presented upon completion of review. All those, if there's no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Karen, you want to run through this? We just have a single warrant, single AP and payroll.
So payroll warrant dated December 18th, 2020 in the amount of $17,066.48.
Any questions on that?
No.
Nope.
So we can go to the accounts payable.
Accounts payable dated December 5th through December 18th, 2020 in the amount of $79,965.01.
The only question I had was about the tractor sales.
About, which one is that?
It's like the fifth or seventh or eighth one down, Chappelle tractor sales. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So that would be for chains. Is that
Got
right,
it.
Brian?
Yeah, tired.
Okay.
So that's for truck chains for the tires.
Great.
All right. So if there's no other questions on that, then I think we are ready to move to public comment on items not on the agenda. If anybody wants to make a public comment, they can either enter something into the chat requesting that, or I'm not able to see everybody at once because of the format of my computer. But if anybody is interested in commenting. I don't hear or see anything coming up on that. So
Josh, I also don't, I'm on an iPad also now, so I'm limited in what I can do. So I don't have a chat option that I can see right now, or it's just beyond my capacity. So I didn't know if broadband was on the agenda tonight.
It is.
Okay, then I'll wait.
Yeah, it's towards the end, Michael.
Okay. If I fall asleep, you just wake me up.
we'll try and keep things moving right along. All right. So select board items for discussion and action. So highway department preliminary budget discussion. And Brian is flying low from Chief Goddard's office, so he's got the label of Chief Goddard. But for those who don't know, that's Brian Goddard behind that label. I mean, Brian Harlow behind that label. And I don't know whether, Karen, do you want to give us an overview and then we can ask questions, Brian, if we want to? You're on mute, Karen.
I have no comments, no. I had to find it. So I can try to share my screen if people would like me to do that, but that way people can follow along, I guess. So with the highway budget, what we're trying to do is level fund the budget again this year with a couple modifications. So we've been talking about trying to move away from borrowing and doing like a equipment reserve fund so we can build it up and then start buying with cash. So Brian's carrying a $271,000 surplus right now. And yeah, $271,955.91. So
Can we just have a round of applause for that?
yeah.
Thank you.
I want to make a comment.
Can you remind us how much of that was a holdover from last year?
Well, it just keeps building. So
Right.
right now, that's for prior years. That's prior years. That's not counting what will happen this year.
That's not current year. Okay.
Right. So I also got a draft of the audit today, but I haven't been through it yet. And just from last year, Josh, he was able to, he had $82,982 in surplus just for last year. So I have to say that Brian runs a really good department when it comes to budgets. He runs it like a business. And, you know, if it's a need, then it's purchase. So I think he does an excellent job financially with his budget. I'm throwing it out there because I see it year after year.
Thank you, Brian, for that.
Well done.
Yeah, the other thing that Brian is certainly also on top of, and Tom as well this year, and Karen, obviously, with your help. And I notice in some notes from Emily today also that, you know, everybody's really looking for and getting grant money on a variety of different things. And I just want to thank everybody for that, their efforts in that realm, because, you know, often that is money that comes to us not with no work, often with quite a bit of work, but usually well worth it as far as what we benefit for the town and for services, et cetera. So those grant monies are very helpful. So how do you want to go look at the budget, Karen? Do you want to put it on your screen?
I can. So I just want to comment too that Brian and I have been in discussions more than once about his budget. And as you know, we should carry between 8 to 12% surplus in any budget.
Overall, yeah.
Overall. So we should leave at least $32,650 in the surplus. And then the remaining $239,321, we can propose an equipment reserve fund, which needs to be created. specifically for highway equipment. And or what we've considered is he's looking at a loader this year for 22. And if we purchase it outright, and right now the price tag on that is $163,000. We could use some of that surplus to buy the loader and still have money where we could set up the equipment fund. And by level funding, we will have a little more money to like put away for, as we drop off payments, we can utilize that money, put it in the equipment fund. Yeah, another option too is to pay off one of the trucks earlier. That's already forecasted out another year. So that money, if it's already paid, it's still in the budget, so that money can drop right into the reserve fund as well.
Brian, tell us a little bit about your current loader and the need for replacement. I can't remember whether, I'm not looking at a capital plan. Was that scheduled for replacement either this year or soon?
Yeah, this is the scheduled year for it.
It is?
Yeah.
And what's your feeling about it? Is it a good time to replace it?
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to get some rust and some age on it, quite a few hours. It's not junk by any means, but it's, you know, that's, it's ready if.
And how many years of service have we gotten out of it?
I think it'll be 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that 162, I think it was, that Karen mentioned, does that include a trade-in?
Yeah, well, I actually, when I did it, I checked on 2 different sizes loaders. So the 163, I think is what it was, right, Karen?
Yes.
163, that was actually the larger of the 2. So that was a 3.5 yard loader, and the one that we have now is a 3 yard loader, and that's just bucket size. So it's a little bit bigger of a loader, and I think I could look in my email, but I think the I think the smaller of the 2, which would be equivalent to the one that we have, was somewhere in the range of I think it was 15,000 less, but don't quote me on that. I think it was around 15,000 less.
And did those include the trade-in value of the?
Yeah. Yeah.
It does. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is roughly how much?
I think it was around 30,000.
It's not bad.
Yeah. I think we only paid 85 for it when we bought it. So.
So how do it's time to replace it in your opinion. If we didn't replace it this year and we ran it one more year, what's the chance that, and I know you can't really answer this because you can't see the future, but you've run equipment forever. So, you know, at what stage is it really at? How much would it cost us to keep it another year in repairs versus replacing it now roughly? I
don't think we'd put any repairs into it. I don't think we'd, I mean, something could always happen, but I don't, you know, like last year with the truck, it was like,
Right,
you know,
right.
we see the stuff that comes down the line with those, and you just kind of know by the amount of years within a certain range, you're going to put springs, you're going to put feed chains, you're going to put some of that stuff into it. I don't really see anything with this that's like going to go bad. I mean, it could any day, but you don't, I mean, I mean, we maintain it well. It's a good loader.
So the reason I ask is if we set up this equipment fund and we put it off one more year and then the $32,000 payment could go right into the fund for that 1 year, and then we replace it the next year. That puts us just a little bit better spot. But it's not a better spot if we end up spending $32,000 on the old loader and we lose the trade-in. So I'm trying to get a feel from you about that, you know?
Yeah, with the loader itself, I think we kind of talked about this last year, and I said that if we were replacing the loader last year, I said that I would be totally fine with keeping it because I just don't see anything really going wrong with it. The biggest problem is that if you put the loader off 1 year, then all of a sudden you bump everything 1 year, and so then no matter what, unless you buy 2 pieces of equipment in 1 year, you have to bump everything a year.
But also, weren't you saying, Karen, that if we set up an equipment fund and we have enough in that fund, then buying stuff cash, saving the money on interest, at some point we get to a point where we could buy whatever we need, whatever year, depending on what we allocate for that equipment fund each year. I don't know if I said that very well, but get to a point where we're not borrowing money anymore. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, but the thing is, we can't, I'm a little nervous if we have to buy, I don't want to get pinched
Mm-hmm.
where we end up buying 2 big pieces of equipment, because that, I don't think we're not going to be able to financially do that. That will not be a good move. So, and I know we have a truck coming up in a year. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, the not for the summer of 21, budget of 22 would be the loader, and then 23 would be
It's the truck. Yeah,
would be
so
yeah.
if we push the loader out a year, then we're looking at purchasing a loader and a truck the same year. I wouldn't want to do that.
But
So
we've
it's-
also, I mean, I understand that people are saying that, but at the same time, if we've extended that out for a year instead of purchasing it a year ahead, what difference does that? I mean, why is that a disadvantage to us? I mean,
You mean you're saying, Josh, because the money from this year will be there next year anyway, and then we'll have planned on spending next year on something else anyway, right?
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, just because we push it back a year, it's not going to cost us. It's going to presumably save us money to do that, as opposed to costing us money. Like David said, unless there's some unforeseen disaster, but we hope that wouldn't happen. But then, I mean, it doesn't really matter if we're purchasing 1 or 2 pieces of equipment in a year. If we were going to purchase 2 over 2 years anyway, we're just holding off a year. But
So
it's
here's the thing.
different perspective on that.
Right. So we were thinking for the equipment reserve fund, I was thinking 200,000. As long as you kept 200,000 in that fund, you could buy a piece of equipment, but you could also pay off some loans early if they only had like 1 year left and they were small enough that we could do that.
Well,
So is if we pay off the loans early, the money that was allocated to pay those loans would go into the equipment fund, which would
Right.
build it faster, which is what Josh is saying.
Right,
Because it's already there.
right, correct.
but if these are typical loans, then we've already paid all the interest. So all we're paying, or almost all we're paying on waiting on paying off loans is principal. And therefore paying, I don't see a benefit to paying it off early unless it's going to save us money, at which in the 5th year of a 5-year loan or the 10th year of a 10-year loan, I don't think would save us any money. So I'm not sure what the value of that would be either. But again, I just may not be seeing it the way you're seeing it for some reason. But I mean, the advantage of paying off a loan early is because it's going to save you a chunk of money.
Mhm.
But if it isn't going to save us a chunk of money, then why would we pay it off early? I mean, I know it's nice to clean up the books and not have to think about it, but if we're going to pay the same amount, whether we pay it this year or next year, why would we
What are the differences? What would we?
Karen, can I say something?
Sure.
I think what Karen was trying to figure out is we have extra money in the highway budget this year. So if we paid, there's one loan that's got $20,000 payments, and there's a payment this year that we already made, and then there's one for next year. So if we use some of that leftover money to pay that off, then that is just one less loan next year to pay, and more money that we can put into the reserve fund next year, just for like easier bookkeeping, I guess, to try to figure out how much money can we have in that account over a certain period of time.
It's not really the bookkeeping, it's whether or not you want to continue borrowing or you want to set up the reserve fund and buy. I mean, if the interest isn't a problem and the community is okay paying interest, then we can continue doing it that way, but
Yeah, but again, if we're in the, I mean, that loan that has one more year on it, is that a 5-year or a 10-year?
5.
that was a 5-year loan.
So I'm just, it's not clear to me that that would actually benefit us in any way to pay that a year early. If we've already paid all the interest on it, which in a 5-year loan.
We haven't, really.
Yeah.
You pay, there's the principal and the interest every single year on the payment.
So
Okay,
it's
this amount, Alyssa?
not front loaded for paying off the interest.
No, but these are regular conventional loans, Josh, through People's or Community Bank. It's not like the Vermont Bond Bank, which is totally reversed.
Well, except most conventional loans are front loaded on interest as well, but I don't know. I guess I'd have to see the paperwork about it to understand why that wouldn't be the case. But I'm not arguing against doing what you're saying. Look, sort of common wisdom on loans to me has always been, if you're close to the end of paying it off, don't pay it off in advance because it doesn't save you anything because you've already paid the bulk of your interest. But this may be a different configuration that doesn't work that way. So.
But it sets us up to save money and put it away into the reserve fund. That's the only reason we would look at paying them off early.
I'm confused. I'd have to see the paperwork, but
Okay.
I mean, how much is the interest on that loan, Alyssa? Do you know?
It was like 1,000 or more.
So that's the general question that I have is just, oh, sorry, David, go ahead.
Is the interest, it's sounding like what you're saying, Alyssa and Karen, is that the interest is the same for each of the 5 years of the payments, or roughly the same? That it does
Roughly, they go down a little bit.
a little bit, but not much. Okay.
Right.
So we paid $5,000 on the loan for that truck, roughly, over 5 years.
In
$1,000.
interest.
I wish that I had my book with me because I could tell you exactly what we paid.
Okay, but that's the idea. And so we would save that $1,000 if we paid it off early, is what you're
Right.
saying. Right. And then that money that was already budgeted could go into the equipment fund, is what you're saying, Karen, instead of go to the payment. So that would $20,000 more into the equipment fund next year.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
So this is relating a little bit to what we talked about last time or 2 times ago. And I know, Josh, one of the concerns you had was if we were spending money or putting it, well, I don't know, you had a concern at one point about that we weren't going to be earning money. And I don't know if this is related to this issue as well, but my question is more about how much I would want to see the number that we would save in interest if we didn't borrow. Or if we paid off early versus, sort of, I would like to see the number that we would save in interest versus the number that we would be putting out toward a purchase so that we can sort of get a sense of the comparison. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, essentially you're highlighting the time value of money. But I don't know, I mean, what's the maximum we can earn by parking money in a fund, Karen?
What do you mean maximum?
Well, I mean, are we earning income on a fund? If we have an equipment fund sitting there for whatever, 100, 200, $300,000, is that earning any income or is it just cash sitting there?
No, it's in the sweep account, so it's earning interest on the whole of, all of the money.
Karen, can I ask another question? At one point, you had a spreadsheet of long-term debt, and you were showing that we were spending about $110,000 a year on interest for various loans.
Yes.
Right? Like that. Okay.
Yep.
So the direction we're heading in is to try to cut that number. If we
Right.
cut that number any percentage, and we gain any percentage on the money that's in an account, we can add those two percentages together, and whether or not that's worth doing, and the ease of being able to have the cash on hand to get whatever we need whenever we need it has a certain value too. Those are the numbers we would need to see, I think. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because I can tell you that Brian, just on his equipment right now that we borrowed against, the interest is like $15,774. And there's, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
That's the
7.
total interest being paid on highway department equipment.
Right, on $215,711 of principal payments.
15,000 per year in interest we're paying?
Roughly, yep.
So
Of course, it goes down a little bit too, but as you pay off the loan. So
Right.
those are, they're approximate. They're not exact, but.
I'm all for this general idea of not paying interest if we can avoid it. And I think having money in a reserve fund is a good idea as long as we're not losing money in what Josh is saying, because it's just, as long as we're making as much interest as we can and the reserve fund isn't in some way lowering our ability to make the interest on the savings that we have or whatever. And so those numbers would be interesting to look at specifically.
Okay, I can get that out to the board
Great.
tomorrow.
I'd like to throw in a comment too, in light of the survey study we just did. One of the major formulas in that study that we did from David Fleming and Ethan Allen Institute had a lot to do with the ratio between long-term debt, interest, and servicing that debt, and what we had for reserve funds. And I know that's just one survey's opinion, and we need to decide what we want to do for ourselves, but it gives us something to look at and think about where we stand in the big picture in the long term. And I think having money in reserve to do what we need to do or service our debt, the higher percentage we have in relationship to what we spend annually or what our long-term debt is a good thing. And so this could be part of that. So another piece of it to think about.
Josh, there's a question in the chat.
Heather is asking, does pushing purchasing back a year affect the replacement program long run? In that buying two things now or in a year, does it stack the replacement and refurbishment 10 years down the line? I think that's sort of the nature of the question or what I was pointing out, is that it doesn't, if we push something back a year, it doesn't necessarily have to adversely affect, well, I don't know. Karen, you want to answer that? I mean, it doesn't need to, in my opinion. I mean, if we're pushing back purchasing it a year, again, I'm not looking at all of this paperwork at once, so it's a little hard to see how pushing that purchase off for a year affects our ability to purchase the year after. I mean, if we're going to purchase two pieces of equipment within 2 years regardless, then purchasing one of them a year later would seem to save us a chunk of money. And I'm confused as to why that doesn't sound like you're thinking the same thing, but.
Well, I think Brian would be able to tell us. I mean, he knows his equipment, so maybe we can do that and push each piece out a year later. But I mean, I'm not the expert on that, and I trust Brian.
I guess what I'm not understanding is why do we have to push out piece of equipment
No.
number 2 if we push out piece of equipment number 1? That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I don't understand why we could keep the whole capital purchasing plan just as it is and shift the purchase of the loader to a year later. Everything else remains the same. And then we've bought ourselves an extra year on that loader, seems to me. But feels like I'm missing something, but I don't understand how I am. So,
Well, if we purchased, is it an 8 or a 10 wheeler we got to replace next, Brian?
6 wheeler.
So we'd be looking at what, $170,000?
No, probably less. Probably around 150.
Okay, so 150 plus 163.
but if we're going to purchase both of those pieces of equipment in 2 years anyway, I'm not sure what I'm missing
Yeah,
there.
but we're borrowing the money right
Well,
now.
what if we do some combination of using some of the money in the equipment reserve and borrowing some of it to reduce our payments? And by doing that, we can build the reserve account, but slower, and get to a
Right.
point where I think you were talking about this earlier today when I was in there, Karen. And
Yeah.
maybe that's a program that we should, or some
Yeah,
way.
we talked about that. Maybe we, pay half for the loader and then borrow the other half, which would be about 80,000 over 5 years. And then the thing too, Josh, is trying to build a reserve fund without having like this big incline, 1 to 2 years. So if we can gradually build it without spending all the reserve or the surplus, without spending all of that surplus all at once. Because if we end up with some sort of disaster and we need to utilize that surplus money, that's the other thing too.
Yeah, I guess you and I should sit down and go through this, Karen, because I really don't understand what I'm missing by how purchasing 2 pieces of equipment in 2 years for, say, $300,000 for the 2 pieces of equipment. If we purchase those both in over 2 years or in 1 year, but it's the second year, I don't see how that's a different equation. I just don't get what the difference is.
I agree with you, Josh. It's not a different equation, and I don't think there's any difference. I think there's 2 things being talked about here. I think one is pushing other equipment back, which I agree with you. I don't think it has to push other equipment back. And 2, I think we're talking about building the reserve fund. And so pushing a piece of equipment back might free up money that was already in the budget to go in the reserve fund instead of making payments. So it seems like there's 2 things being talked about here at the same time, and that's the confusion. And you're right. I think you should sit down and you guys should talk about that. I like the idea of doing as much of it as we can without interest, as much as we can as possible without interest too, and building a fund where we could possibly work towards in time buying most of the equipment we need without having to borrow money. That would be great.
Yeah,
How
no,
do that?
definitely in favor of that too.
I'm not sure how to make that happen, but that's what I would like. Yep.
I understand the 2 different things you're talking, but I don't understand how one influences the other. It doesn't. I mean, if it were, yeah.
I think it influences the other by just changing it 1 year. If we pay something off early, it makes it 1 year earlier that we can take that allotment and put it in the reserve fund. I think that's the only thing that I saw.
But why can't we just take that money that we took to pay it off early and put it in the reserve fund a year earlier?
We could maybe. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, either way, it's the same money. You're just spending it a year sooner or a year later. I mean, there's the $1,000 of interest, and I understand that, and that's worth saving, but if we're paying that off, I'm not even talking about paying that off early. I'm just talking about the purchase of 2 pieces of equipment, whether it's in 1 year or 2 years, makes no difference at all. I don't understand how that changes that, but I
Come to the office, Josh, and I'll show you the what if scenario.
Yeah.
And we'll go over it.
Can I
Josh,
say
there's a,
something for a minute?
Yeah.
So when I looked at it, as far as the loader, we had enough money in the reserve fund to purchase the loader outright this year without borrowing any money.
Right.
So that was 163. It left us within the range percentage wise of what we wanted for to have in our reserve fund. With the payments that would go away the following year, if you took that money and put it into an equipment fund, it makes us awfully close to being able to purchase the loader this year, purchase the truck next year, and still not have to borrow. And as we lose those payments that we're paying, that money gets reallocated. Stay paying it, but it goes into the equipment fund.
Right.
And what that does is, as soon as we get, you're going to have a target goal for a dollar amount to go into that equipment fund. As soon as you reach that target goal, then at that point you lose the payment and you don't have to raise the money anymore.
Right. No, I understand.
And I think
all
with
the math behind this, there's one piece that somebody's seeing differently than I am, and I don't understand that. But I'll look at that.
I think with the stuff that's lined up coming down the road, we have the loader was supposed to be this year, the dump truck the following year, and then we go to the pickup, and that's only like a $50,000 purchase. So then we really gain towards building on that equipment fund. And I thought it was a good time as far as the payments that are leaving or
Right.
going to be paid off, and the equipment that's lined up here, everything looked pretty good right up until you go to buy the grader, and that's really our only huge dollar. But it would still be close. We would have gained enough on that fund that maybe with a little bit of leftover surplus money from the operating budget, I think we would be really close to getting out of it. But I mean, a lot more needs to get looked into to
Right.
look at equipment down the line and actually figure out the right dollar amount to put into that fund. But I know when I figured it out, probably, I don't know how long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, it was around 135,000 was what we needed to put into that fund every year. And we're probably still somewhat close to that. I'm not sure, maybe it's 140, but I know that it looked a lot less than the amount that we have right now paying all our payments.
So go ahead. I'm sorry, Bear.
Just 2 questions. Or one thing is, Josh, I'm also seeing it the way you're seeing it. So once you figure out what's seeing differently, I hope you'll share it with the board. And then the second thing is, it sounds like, Brian, from what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, there's like a cap on how much money can go into a certain reserve fund. And so the concern is that if we reach that cap, but we still actually need to be saving money, if we have this idea, we want to continue saving more and more money in order to buy things outright. It sounds like we would need to raise the cap on that fund so that we could save more, and that's what part of what we're talking about here of doing. Is that accurate?
There isn't a cap, I don't believe.
No.
I think that the cap is a practical cap of, why have $450,000 sitting around in an account when you only need $250,000 sitting around in an account?
So then what we would have to do is just change our thinking and say, well, the reason we have 450,000 standing there is because we plan on buying outright. Is that correct?
Well, except even if we were buying outright, we wouldn't necessarily need that sitting there. I mean, we need to just figure out what that sweet spot of having a fund that's big enough so that we can purchase what we need to when we need to, but not have money sitting around that could be working for us in some other way. I mean,
But it sounds like what Brian's saying is putting one off for a year makes it seem like then we won't be able to have the $450,000 because do you see what I'm saying? Like if we put one off 1 year, then we're going to be having, instead of having 250,000 for one purchase, we're going to have 450,000 because we want to purchase two, and that's where it gets tricky.
No, I don't think so. I think it's because right now we, essentially we have the money to make the purchase this year. So really it doesn't, I don't think it makes a difference whether you wait a year or buy it this year because you already have the money. So it's not like, it's just a matter of it's a big pill to swallow when you when you think about it, instead of just trying to, my idea of the whole thing is just trying to flatline it, make it so we put a certain amount of money in an account every year and that covers us no matter what. And so you can pretty much guarantee what you're going to spend instead of having it go all over the place.
Yeah, it's
I
up
guess
and down.
the only thing about that is then what David seemed to be saying about if we can get another year out of the truck though, why buy it this year? Why buy the new one this year? That's like where we're all trying to figure out, right?
right.
If we can just,
Yeah.
the loader.
The thought I had was if we don't buy it this year, does that make our goal of getting to where we want to be 1 year sooner because we got that year's use out of that loader?
That's what it would seem to me, but there seems to be, that's what I'm not understanding is why that wouldn't be the case. And I understand we'd have to buy two pieces of equipment, or potentially we'd have to buy two pieces of equipment in the following year. But if we would have already spent $163,000 this year, then what we've done with that $163,000, if we put it into a reserve fund and it's earning, even if it's only 2% interest, we've got $167,000 in that fund available to us to purchase that, unless we anticipate that the inflation on the piece of equipment is going to go up faster than our fund is generating funds. Then that seems to make no difference as far as, yes, it's a bigger number in 1 year than it is in another, but it still works to our benefit as far as I can tell. But
so what I see here, Brian, on the capital plan for the highway department, we're averaging somewhere between $135,000 and $172,000 in expense a year in payments on this sheet right here. Okay, you have that, Karen?
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like at today's figures, we need to put about that much money in an account to be able to cover whatever you need. So, and that's going to go up as things go up in price, but probably, pretty predictably. And it seems to me like the bigger question is, how quickly do we want to build that fund so we have replaced it? We have a chunk of money in there so we can spend $150,000 and still have the chunk of money in there for whatever we might need. And so it seems like Karen's idea was that paying off early might get us there sooner.
Right.
That's what it seemed like to me.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a good idea for what you were saying, Josh and Karen, that you guys will, it sounds like there are like all these different levels of details that need to just be looked at instead of having this be kind of a hypothetical. And then it would be great to hear what you guys figure out together.
Yeah, this is all preliminary talks anyway. So it's just stuff.
I'm all in favor of building this reserve fund. It's just the mechanics of why when we commit to. I mean, for all practical purposes, it sounds like we have that fund already built from the surplus that we've built up over X number of years. So as long as we don't,
But just in the highway department, right?
just in
Yeah.
the highway department, yes,
Right.
no, and that's an important detail, Bara, because this money is allocated to the highway department as it is, correct, Karen? I mean, we
Yes.
couldn't, for example, offset general fund expenses with this money. We would either save this money and put it into a designated fund for highway fund purchases, or we would decrease if we wanted to instead try and decrease the tax burden on taxpayers next year, then we could take X amount of that money and just put it towards the following year's highway fund budget. But the funds in the highway fund and the funds in the general fund are different and not transferable.
Right.
So,
And is it sounded like Karen and David, you were talking about wanting there to be a reserve fund possibly for the general fund as well. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, great.
yeah, which for all practical purposes, well, I mean, I think it's for a bunch of different things. There's highway, there's sewer and water, but the reserve, our primary capital purchases as far as the general fund are concerned tend to be fire department.
Right.
So, that because it's vehicles that, decrease quickly and have to be replaced on a regular schedule. So that's where a general fund, reserve fund, for the most part, would be of use to us. I mean, there, building maintenance and other things where that would be valuable to us, but.
Can I add something? It's probably just going to complicate everything.
Don't do it.
I'm like, all right, so we know where we stand with the highway department at the moment, correct? Okay.
Yes.
So the sidewalk. So we have a reserve fund for the sidewalk. It's phase 2 and 3. And right now we have $145,480.55 in that reserve account. Okay. So I wanted to mention tonight that I want the select board to consider repurposing that money. And what I'm going to recommend or propose, I'm going to propose it. I don't want to recommend anything right now. I'm going to propose that we take $28,105 and pay off the sidewalk loan that we have. Okay. We're going to pay it off 1 year early. So that money that would be in the budget for next year would be able to go to the reserve, okay, in the highway department. So that brings the 145,480.
All right, so this sidewalk is in the sidewalk reserve fund is part of the general fund, isn't it?
It is. So when we repurpose, so the second step of that, Josh, is to take the rest of the money, the $117,375, and move it to the sidewalk fund, which is sitting in the general fund. And technically, maybe the sidewalk fund should be actually in the highway fund, but it was put into the general fund, so that's where it is. Now, if you move that money into the sidewalk fund, right now, we are putting into the sidewalk fund every year $10,000. So you wouldn't have to do that.
So how did we get to such a significant number in the sidewalk fund? Because we didn't start that fund 17 years ago. So at $10,000 a year, how did we get such a large number in there so quickly?
No. You're confusing. So the sidewalk fund right now has 40,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what's the other fund, Karen? The other one's for building the sidewalk?
It was for phase 2 and phase 3 to Landmark.
Oh, so those are surpluses from those.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I misunderstood that.
Yeah.
So wait, can I just make sure because I wasn't here for any of that. So this is money that was thought was going to be used to build the sidewalk, but that money wasn't needed
It was money that was contributed to the sidewalk project
from the town?
from,
I mean, as
from
a,
Landmark College.
oh, okay, got it.
So are there stipulations on that money? Can we move it? Like, we can't take money that was designated for the highway fund and use it in the general fund. Can we reallocate that money?
We're gonna repurpose it because it's sidewalk.
So yes, the answer is, David, it's within the general fund and it's not, it was designated, I mean, it was contribution towards construction of the sidewalk, but we paid that out of general fund funds. So this
Right.
money then has come in from, so this is not really money in addition. I mean, we spent all the money. What you're saying, Karen, appears to have, would imply that the sidewalk was a whole lot cheaper to build than we thought it was going to be, but that's not the case. It's just that we already paid that, and now Landmark has given us the money towards it, so that
This is a reimbursement.
would be essentially returning that money to the general fund where it came from in the first place.
Correct.
So it's like reimbursement. We're reimbursing the general fund. That's what you're saying. Okay, I understand now.
But,
Well, we're not- yeah.
because it's within the general fund budget that we're able to do that. I mean, we can't, I mean, Karen is saying maybe overall that whole section should be moved into highway, and maybe that's something we could discuss, but for the purposes of this, it's all housed within the general fund, and therefore it needs to stay within the general fund for the time being.
But we could decide to move it to the highway fund, which is what you were saying, Karen. Is that right? Did I hear right?
I want phase 2 and 3 sidewalk to be repurposed to the sidewalk fund that's established in the general fund.
It's still in the
Okay.
general. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
And then some of that money, if it was repurposed to the sidewalk fund, then some of that money could be repurposed from there to the general fund. I mean, it's already within the general fund, but it doesn't have to stay in sidewalk reserve.
Oh, no, it does. It does. It does.
Okay.
Because
It has to stay in reserve?
it's specific to the sidewalk.
So you're hoping to move it out so that we could into this other fund so you could use it for future sidewalks, that kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay, I
I'm
understand.
just consolidating these two
I got it.
accounts. They're both reserve accounts.
I got it. Okay, I understand that.
Yes.
So the sidewalk reserve that you want to move the money into is because it's anticipated there will be more sidewalks built?
That's a possibility, Barry, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We had talked about that, hadn't we? What the New Wyndham Windsor project possibly happening, and we're talking about Old Depot Road, weren't we? There was some discussion last year, Josh, about this, about crosswalks and sidewalks, and wasn't there?
Old Route 5, you know, there was a design for sort of a loop around on Old Route 5 to take pedestrian traffic off of Main Street, and the same on Depot Road, on Old Depot. You know, as it is now, I mean, I guess the only place I would assume that if the Wyndham Housing Trust, if that project goes forward, I would assume they would be looking at installing sidewalks of their own, which then the town, I mean, I would think that would be within the scope of their project, not likely that they would build a housing project with the expectation that we would build sidewalks to it, but I could be wrong, I'm not sure. I mean, the idea between the fund that was established for the sidewalk was that was a sidewalk maintenance fund, not a sidewalk new construction fund. Because sidewalks need maintenance. I mean, that just happens.
Okay.
But this money that's from Landmark was specifically for construction of sidewalk. So that's sort of in a different category, but we already spent that money out of the general fund and have been reimbursed by landmark for it, so I'm not,
Mhm.
it seems to me we potentially could repay that back into the general fund if we chose to, instead of choosing to put it in a reserve for the sidewalk, but I might be wrong.
So it's just a proposal. And we can discuss it further.
That
We can
sounds
leave
good.
it right where it is too, if we want.
We could leave it right where it is. Yeah, well, no, well, except what it's in it. Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, it would make more sense to consolidate it because then we know what it is
Right.
in, instead of having 3 funds labeled
Right.
sidewalk, we have 1 fund labeled sidewalk, and then we could choose to move some out of it if we wanted to. So,
Right. We don't have a policy yet too for the, for the sidewalk maintenance
right,
reserve.
what that means and how we spend it, so on and so
Yep.
forth.
Right.
You know, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, for example, the work that's about to be done on the stairs on Town Hall could technically be thought of as sidewalk money, but
Mhm.
but technically it might not be. So,
Right.
but maintenance things. I mean, that the incident, the stone wall repair that needed to be done in front of the tavern, you know,
Right.
that's sidewalk related because it was sidewalk maintenance work that caused the problem. So,
Right.
we do end up with, and also the Mabel Gray sidewalk, which is the one that goes from the center of town up to the central school, is aging. And I'm sure Brian would have areas where he could imagine putting some money into that for touch up even now, much less going forward. So, anyway, we better move on. So highway, we've talked about big ticket issues in the highway department budget discussion, but we haven't talked about other stuff. Do we need to right now, Karen, or really we have the highway budget presented to us? We need to spend time reviewing that. And if we have questions, Vera or David, then we need to ask them, but otherwise it's there.
No, yeah, I'm comfortable with it the way it sits right now until we decide how to do the surplus.
Can I add one question?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
State aid to highways, we're down 18,000. Are we expecting to get the rest of that? Is that just a payment that hasn't come, or are we not going to get that?
No, we'll get it. It comes in like quarters.
Okay, great. And then we're down 17,000 on the grants and aid. Do we expect that too?
I just got $20,000 from them today,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
21,300.
But I do think we're anticipating in at least the year to come, Karen, that those funds are going to be pretty significantly diminished. Isn't that right? Or do we not know that yet?
I don't know that yet. All I can say is that we don't have any paving projects coming up or big. We have projects, but we're not in the loop for a grant. And
Right.
we have not applied for any structured grants either. So we have no major grant projects coming up.
Last I knew, they I don't know how you word it, but I think it was like they suspended it for this coming year.
That was my impression too. Yeah.
Structures grants and class 2, which I think structures and class 2 paving grants are they're basically from the same pot of money. It's just
Right.
but I think that money kind of got, I can't remember, but I think I read that we can apply for it and it's not going to be, usually it's given out based on a percentage of funding, past funding. So they come up with, the highest funded goes to the bottom and the least funded is at the top. And I think that, so if you're at the bottom, you almost don't put in for it because it's not a waste of time. You could possibly get it if nobody else put in, but where I think you can put in for it, and I'm not sure it's actually as specific as it was with the structures or the class 2 paving grants. Could be for for other stuff. I'm not exactly sure what the requirements are on what it would go for, but I think it's more of just a help thing for towns that are having a problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, it's hard to predict given, I mean, the expenses related to the pandemic. The state budget is, got a huge hole in it. It's also, if there's a significant going forward in a year or so, if there's a significant infrastructure bill that comes down, then that might shift that back in a different direction. Really hard to know that. No way to know it at this point. But I don't know whether Mike is still on. If he, well, I guess we won't go into it. I think we've talked about highway enough for the moment.
Yeah.
I just want to say before Brian, if he takes off, we're, as the select board, we've been talking a lot about trying to figure out how to have less of a tax burden on the taxpayers. And it's really great to see how you run your department with a surplus. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I also think, I think we all share the interest of shifting things. And as Brian said, and Karen has been thinking, there are sort of moments in time where that makes more sense than other times when you look at the capital fund, at the capital plan. And so, whatever we can do to capitalize on that, no pun intended, but to shift it in essentially the town's favor because there's a lull for whatever reason, then we should take advantage of that because a low year can get us significantly ahead. So, all right. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
Good
you.
luck tonight.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, don't stay up all night, Brian.
I'm going to bed.
Josh, there's
Yeah.
there's a message in the chat.
Right.
Let's see. It saves money today, does get replaced in the same, which, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's very much the same discussion we were having. If it saves money today, does it get replaced in the same manner in 5, 10, 15 years when these items get replaced? Have you stacked the budget that far out and doesn't account for a catastrophic event? I mean, the capital plan, if you've seen it, is just a schedule of all those purchases and when they come up over time and the projected costs related to them. I mean, we project out further on the items that need to be projected out further, but we're essentially looking, as far as how it's budgeted out and what we're looking at, it's roughly on a 5-year scale, so that we see what we're paying out over the next 5 years. But historically, and I think this is what we would be trying to take advantage of, is, when there is a lull in that, but we're projecting the next 5 years, can we shift it so that our interest expenses are less in that next 5 years than they were in the immediate 5 years in front of us? And that's a matter of how to take advantage of having a reserve fund to make those purchases instead of. So, yeah, we certainly think of it on a 15, I mean, we think of it on a very long scale. Fire trucks, we look at 20-year timeframes or even longer. I mean, on this whole discussion about the last fire truck, that was really looking at a 10-year time, a 20-year time frame for that truck and then a refurbishment. So in all practical purposes, it was almost trying to look at a 40-year timeline. And of course, at that point, that's somewhat speculation, but the idea is to be able to look at it that far out. So I don't know whether that answers that question, but that's my take on it. All right, so next, moving right along, Tom, general fund. Do you want to specifically talk about fire department, Karen, or do you want to have a more broad general fund discussion?
it's more broad, and again, we're carrying a $202,822 surplus in the general fund right now. So we would need to keep $24,338 at least as surplus.
We wouldn't need to, but it would be recommended that we did. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not required to hold any surplus at all, but it's recommended that we have an 8 to 10% of our
8 to 12, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So, we're kind of thinking the same lines as the highway department. You know, we set up certain reserves so we can start saving money for purchases, you know, especially for the fire department where we have big dollar items, and not be looking at borrowing. So when we borrow through the Vermont Bond Bank, which we have 3 loans right now, one being the fire station and the wastewater and the sewer. All 3 of those loans are, they were refinanced and they're all in one loan right now, but we don't have the opportunity to pay those off early.
right.
So it makes it difficult. And right now, the fire station will be paid off in 2027, but the other 2 loans go out to 2040. And Barra, this is where your question comes into play. How much interest are we paying?
Right.
Yeah. So we're not able to pay those off early because that's just part of the loan agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
So we can refinance every 10 years, but I'm not sure if that's a wise decision either. And I think our loans right now on those 3 loans, you know, they average like 3 to 4% interest.
Yeah, or lower, I think. Don't they, Karen? A little bit less than that?
Maybe not a little bit lower, but let me see if I have that right here.
Those are
Here's
0.93.
3.93.
Yeah, 3.93 is the highest.
Mhm.
And which one is that? That's the fire department.
Right.
Exactly.
They're all 3.93 because they're all consolidated into one loan.
So I just have a clarification question.
Sure.
The loans can't be paid off early. Is it that it's like every payment has been figured out ahead of time and you have to stick to that? Or can you pay more principal early and at least decrease the interest? No, not at all. Okay.
Not at all. No,
Okay.
no. It's just the way they operate.
Yeah.
So again, we're thinking about creating the reserves that we need. So we're so that money's, you know, building. And I think we need to start looking at, you know, saving money. I went ahead, right now we kind of level funded the general fund budget as well. My goal always every year is to not have taxes go up, because, you know, even though we can keep our budgets level funded, I don't know what the education tax will do to, you know, property tax, you know, values. And we don't have any control over the school budget, so.
Question. I can see pretty clearly in the highway department how money that's already been allocated to buy a piece of equipment could then be turned into an equipment fund without increasing the burden on the taxpayer. So what do we do in the general fund? What do we, in a sense, reallocate, and how do we do that? I guess I don't understand it well enough to know. What are your ideas on that, Karen?
This one's a little bit harder to predict, because it's tighter for one, and there's not a whole lot of money that we can repurpose,
Mhm.
you know, like in the highway department. There are a couple, you know, small loans that we could pay off early. You know, like Tom's 2 pickup trucks. But other than that, you know, we can, if we pay the loans off earlier, we can still level fund the budget. So those payments are in there and that money can go to the reserve. But
Just like the highway department.
Yeah,
Just like-
just like, yes.
So I think part of the difference is that, you know, the highway fund, it's a huge percentage of the highway fund is equipment purchases. Whereas town, it's a much lower number that, because it's really only fire department equipment, it's a much lower number for the town or for the general fund that are equipment purchases. I mean, but the reality is the bond funding for things that have been bonded, that's where the interest payments are coming from. And the reason those interest payments are, well, I mean, they're painful because they extend for so long and you can't pay it off in advance. So, you know, that's a fixed number for us for a long period of time. And those have been there. I mean, that the water bond and the fire department bond and the water bond were both previous to my time. I mean, those originated in the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, something like that, Tom.
Right.
Fire department and
Yep.
water just about the same time.
Same time frame.
And then sewer goes back even further than that. You know, what we've added in the bonds is the gravel pit. We bonded for that.
Right.
But that's not one of the consolidated loans. And that's at a significantly lower rate. Is that correct, Karen?
Yeah, that one is, let me just see, 2.93.
Yeah.
So it's a whole percent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that another one that cannot be paid off? Principal can't be paid off earlier?
That's correct.
Okay.
So again, what we need to focus on too is what we can obtain for grants that can help us reduce purchasing costs, but also having a reserve like specific to equipment for fire department. You know, the other thing too, Josh, is like renovations, you know,
Right.
renovations at town hall or, you know.
Yes,
Whatever public
definitely.
building
No,
you
I
have.
mean, I think more reserve funds is good.
Right.
Especially since, you know, those, I mean, when well, the fire department was, when it was built was around $1 million, I think. But, you know, if you're looking at sewer and or water, these are huge expenses. I mean, I can't remember what the water, and a lot of that gets funded, you know, there's a lot of funding that comes down through various different state operations that help with funding for those things, but those are massive expenditures. So building a reserve fund for those is a much longer term prospect. And that's true in some ways for, I mean, as Brian said, you know, his big purchase at any given time is a grader.
Right.
With Tom, you know, replacing any of the more substantial engines is a big expense at any given time. It's only the pickup trucks that are somewhat lower ticket items. So,
Right.
you know, when we look at building a reserve fund in the general fund, we're really looking at a much longer horizon.
Yes. And I think it's going to take a little time to build it up too.
Besides grants, are there any other ways to generate money or any other ways to if we can't reduce the cost because we can't cut interest payments back and we really don't have any reserves now to retask to a reserve fund, you know, how else can we affect the income? I mean, is there any way to bring more money besides raising taxes,
So
grants and taxes?
So what I ended up doing, I had to reduce some of our revenue lines because they weren't in line with the actuals. So by doing that, you know, it raises the amount of money that has to be raised through taxation. And I try to stay away from that the best I can. So the only way to offset that is to reduce expenses, you know, so the money that needs to be raised tries to be level. And I'm pretty close this year to last year's, but this is a preliminary budget for the general fund, and it will change. I'm hoping it's not going to be a drastic change. I don't believe it'll be a drastic change, but there might be minimal change in this budget.
Josh, you're on mute.
Thank you. You know, are there ways, Tom, to cut back on fire department budget? I mean, I know that that's a tough question. I mean, I think David's objective of sort of shaving wherever we can, which is great. And we should all, we should do that sort of across the board as much as possible. But where do we shave percentages here and there? And do you see any? I mean, I know you try and keep your budget as slim as you can, regardless. So.
Right, and obviously that's the same question that gets asked every single year.
Yeah.
And we all understand it. We get it. The reality is the answer is the same as it's been every single year. We're as tight as we can possibly get. And the reality is, if you go back historically and look at the budgets, inevitably every single year we're over budget on at least a couple line items, because on the front end there's no room to improve. There's no room to increase those. So we try everything. I mean, and Karen's already aware this year already, and we're just barely, we're coming up on halfway through the budget. I'm already putting stuff off till next budget, because as far as repair stuff and stuff that we legitimately, hopefully can, I'm already putting off because I know other stuff's going to be coming. And so that's how tight we are. And that's the game we play every single year.
Yeah.
And it's just the way it is. So that's the game we play. Now, to continue with what Karen had mentioned, I think if Karen and I can get things done, we're going to be bringing forth a proposal for you for setting money aside that's already in place. It's not adding anything. It's already money that's in place and coming that's going to be available to start some things there. And I know, obviously, and you folks know, apparatus replacement, those are the big ticket items, but believe me, there's plenty of other stuff here in the station, equipment in-house that falls under capital, and those have some pretty hefty price tags as well. So in order to help us stop having to play games, that's one way we'll be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily impact the budget, the operating budget, and not force us to play games every year from midway on through each fiscal year.
You're saying by having a reserve fund, that'll prevent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
No, so I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, Karen, that roughly $202,000 that's in surplus currently.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and sorry, I had to step out for a sec, but any reason that shouldn't be going towards initiate, or at least a significant portion of that going towards initiating a reserve fund for the general fund?
Yeah. I'll look at it and see what we can, feasibly we need to start somewhere, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the other part, as Tom said, every year we look at this stuff, the other thing that comes up every year, and, this being no different, is do we put some of that directly back in so that it offsets increases in taxes in the upcoming year? And that is just a question. I mean, are we better off? Is there a longer term advantage of putting that money directly into a reserve fund as opposed to using it to offset increases in the next year in order to be able to level fund sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really analyzed this one as much as I analyzed the highway. But there's options, so I just need to really nail it down. But Tom and I have been working together. He's got a list he went through the whole building to see what's going to be needed for future. I think that's a good start because we really didn't have that, So it may become a need, but it'll be in the capital plan. We're looking at even small things like electricity, and how can we cut those costs?
Yeah.
So I don't know how much Putney has invested in this. I know that there's an energy conservation committee and stuff, but the fire department is actually much newer construction, so it might not be as big an issue. But what is, as far as insulation and stuff like that in the older buildings? Because we at my house have done a lot of insulating, and we're down to almost zero on our utilities. And I know that's not going to be possible for the town, but what steps have been taken in the town as far as that's concerned?
We have a town hall maintenance fund, and for a number of years, the majority of that went into energy retrofitting. Town hall, town hall's tricky because without doing a major project on it, you can only bite off bits and pieces that are accessible. So we've done things, for example, a number of years ago, we foamed the entire basement, put insulation under the slab and poured a slab down there, cleaned that up, and then insulated between the two floors because we don't use the second floor space, but also the roof system has been insulated. There aren't that many. The highway department, well, highway's separate from general fund, but the highway department is a really hard one to make any more efficient just because of the nature of the building. So there hasn't been a whole lot done on that. But town hall, what really should be done on town hall, but it's a big project, is the perimeter walls. They were insulated with urethane foam probably back in the 60s, and that is a material that over time, or that particular version of it over time, turns to dust. So there's virtually no insulation in the perimeter walls in town hall.
And I know that that's not necessarily going to save a lot of money, but that's one area, again, of the many small areas that can be looked at.
Yeah, no, we've done quite a bit on that, but it's ongoing, and the technology's changed too. I mean, Tom, for example, in the fire department, it was either last year or the year before, we put in mini splits.
Yes.
Which, we could definitely do that in town hall. There's two reasons. One, they're more efficient. Two, they're not fossil fuel based. So,
and then if you get solar panels to run them, you have zero energy use for those.
Yes, and we have a power purchase agreement with the solar organization that we bought into a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago now, I would guess. Maybe not quite, 8 to 10
Not
years
quite.
ago.
Yeah.
And that's probably, I mean, as you probably know, Bara, the whole nature of the expenses of solar have shifted so dramatically.
I
in the
know.
last years. It's probably not as beneficial to us as it could be at this point in time. And we've talked about doing more solar. I mean, certainly the roof of the fire department is a candidate for significant solar installation, things like that. But that's why we need to reconstitute the energy committee, keep after things like that.
Yep.
So in the beginning of this, Karen and Tom, you talked about having some things in place where it sounded like what you were saying was that you had ideas of how you could start this reserve fund. And I wondered if those were things you wanted to talk about, or if you're still working on that.
We're still working on that.
Okay.
So I'll know more by December 30th.
Okay.
So we just got a draft of the audit. So, I can look at things and, because that does kind of tie into the budget too.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have Mark Anderson here too.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's Tom, unless you want to add anything and or stay for the conversation with Sheriff Anderson, I don't think you probably need to stay, but.
The only thing I would like to add, and Karen alluded to it, but I just want to follow up on it. In our proposed budget, you're going to see a healthy increase in the electricity line item. To be absolutely honest, we can't explain it. Explain why our bills have gone up so dramatically. But I'm working with Green Mountain Power. I started conversations with them today. I got a voicemail from one of their engineers out of Burlington late this afternoon. He had a lot of information that I did not absorb when I listened to it, so I'm going to have to listen to his voicemail again and then talk with him. And I think what they're going to end up doing is actually putting on some temporary equipment down here on the meter to be able to figure things out a little bit more with us, and then we're going to do what we need to do to correct things if in fact we find we need to.
When did that significant increase occur, Tom? Because logically you would have had a significant increase associated with the conversion to your mini splits, but this seems like above and beyond.
Yeah, there's something out of whack somewhere. It was within the last year, so I'm not thinking it's the mini splits, because those have been here now 3 years. And those draw virtually nothing.
So how much change? Like 10% or 100% change?
100%.
Wow.
Yeah. And we haven't added anything here. We've through maintenance processes, we've actually improved a couple of our motors that on compressors and so on that are here, because the new motors are more energy efficient. So we made those upgrades.
You changed your lighting out too.
Yeah, changed our lighting. So I don't know. We don't know what the deal is, but we will figure it out and we'll do what we got to do.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hopefully it's a problem with the meter and they'll pay you a bunch of money to reimburse you for all the money you had to spend.
There is, and we talked about this issue a couple years ago when we had the new generator put in. At that point, the electricians found that we had some issues with our service conductors and water infiltration into the conductor cables. I'm hoping that we don't have power going to ground somewhere.
Right.
That's causing the issue. I hope. But if we do, then
You'll fix it.
Then we'll fix it. That's all.
Right.
All right. And you're your air filtration or exhaust system is up and running, Tom?
No, that got bumped off a week, so they'll be here Monday to start install.
Okay, great.
And then they're scheduled to complete it.
Okay. All right. So Sheriff Anderson. Let's
Mark?
see.
There he is. Sorry,
Hello.
Mark, for keeping you
It's okay.
waiting.
So how do you want to, Karen, how do you want to address Mark on this as far as having him describe? I mean, my recollection is the offer is level funded. Is that correct?
That is correct. And Sheriff Anderson is here tonight to just give us a little overview of the services and, you know, kind of touch base on how things are going in Putney. The other thing too I have him here for is animal control officer, which is something he's developing, but I did put $7,500 in the budget for next year, if we're going to consider having a regional animal control officer and work with other municipalities. So you're on, Sheriff Anderson.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Basically, knowing that towns were going to be facing difficulties coming through and out of COVID, we did continue with level funding. That was in part possible because of grants we applied for that help us offset some of the costs, like the town, our personnel costs, like insurance, they go up every year. We have no control over it. So through work that actually Representative Maricki was also part of helping us with, we were able to apply for state and federal grants that helped us out. This year was our first year to test. I don't know if you want to call it a pilot or a new way of doing policing, but essentially a regionalization between Putney and Westminster. That started in July, so we are about a little less than 6 months into that operating. The hard part in giving any comparisons of trends or anything is with COVID this year. We know that there were significant changes simply because of the requirements for lockdowns and limited travel and whatnot. In comparison of the fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, our call volume was down about 400 calls over the period. Of that, about 270 were motor vehicle stops. That was due to traffic tapering off during the time from roughly March to May. We've seen similar levels of other things from year to year, with maybe some slight degradation. DUIs went down by about 4 or 5 arrests from 19 to 20. Suspended driver's license arrests went down. We saw about the same level of mental health issues where we responded and or engaged mental health services in the county between those 2 years. And what is of concern to me is just in the 6 months, we've already got the same number of mental health connected calls as we had over those 2 years. So we are seeing an uptick there. The concerns with increases in domestic violence have been reported. We're not seeing them indicated in our statistics. Specifically law enforcement doesn't mean that relief from abuse orders aren't up. It doesn't mean that people are accessing mental health clinicians who are working through familial issues that way. We are aware that through DCF, they are seeing increases in domestic related issues. So something to be aware of, though right now our numbers simply aren't reflecting it. I have spoke with Putney and Westminster, both through some of the growing pains of this new method of trying to provide policing from 7 in the morning to 10 at night through to both Putney and Westminster, as opposed to just 8-hour period on to either town at any given point, does seem to be working. We've been working through some minor issues. Some of them are communication issues that we anticipated having to resolve. We've worked with the state police to resolve some cross wires. So we have been working through some of the kinks in the road that we didn't know to foresee, but knew we would see, and have been resolving those as they've been coming up. So I'd like to propose, again, doing the same thing that we've been doing the last 6 months. It comes at the same cost that the town of Putney's been spending, and in essence, you get access to what is now a regionalized resource as opposed to a 40-hour limited resource. Any questions with that?
I'm just wondering on sort of bigger picture, you within the, well, particularly noticeable the uptick in mental health issues. Are you looking, I know a lot of departments are looking at integrating more social work, more social services as part of their sort of community policing concept. Is that something you're currently working on and or thinking about?
Yes, we actually, we brought on a police social worker back, I want to say 8 months ago, but don't hold me to the date. So that's been something we've been trying to integrate for some time. His name is Knowles Wentworth. It's through the COSU grant, which for anybody unfamiliar with COSU, that's a consortium on opioid and substance use disorder in Windham County. So we have a police social worker through a grant, which also is another service that the town has access to at no additional cost. So we are looking at those things. The state is now, specifically the legislature, is looking at ways to integrate police social workers. We've long supported it. My predecessor, Keith Clark, he was a champion of it when he was the chief of Bells Falls. Because of the way that the Sheriff's Department delivers policing to all of Windham County, it hasn't made sense in the same context to embed them into our office. So they were embedded into the state police, and we had full access to them as well. So in short, yes.
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Fairman, go ahead.
may I ask Sheriff Anderson a question?
Yes.
Sheriff Anderson, you referred to, if I understood correctly, to regionalization between Putney and Westminster. That's an interesting concept. I wonder if you could explain that in terms of how it works for a deputy working a shift.
Yes, so both the town of Putney and Westminster have funded for several years, funded a full-time deputy to provide policing to those communities. So in Putney's situation, that would be 40 hours based on whatever the schedule was set. So that might be Tuesday through Saturday, it might be Sunday through Thursday, it might be Monday through Friday. And that was a conversation that we would have with the town manager or the select board, a combination of the two. What we did this year was to say that the state police resources are limited throughout the entire county. With the consolidation that occurred, they increased coverage area. They also received more troopers, but there was a realization that communities need to start looking at the issues that they have going on in their communities. And one of the ways that we were able to strategize working with the state police to help in that context without adding additional costs is to develop a partnership between the town of Putney and the town of Westminster, who are both contributing the same financial resources for this service. But rather than say we have potentially 2 deputies working simultaneously in the town of Putney and the town of Westminster, we said, how about we have a deputy who works in the town of Putney and Westminster all at the same time? that falls back on my department to ensure that we deliver the amount of service each town is paying for. But given the population similarities and the call volume between both towns, we felt that that was a relatively safe thing to do. So, Mr. Fairman, we have a deputy who works from 7 in the morning Monday till 10 p.m. at night, and they do that Monday through Friday. And then the state police provide services after 10 p.m. as well as on the weekend.
And does that mean that the deputy who's doing both towns will drive through Putney and then will drive through Westminster, or what does that look like?
So the proactive answer is they are scheduled for 4 hours. Each deputy shift is 8 hours long, approximately. They will be scheduled in 4 hours in each town for their shift. However, if a deputy is in Westminster and let's say a car accident occurs on Main Street, they'll respond from Westminster to Putney and they'll handle it. And so part of the deputy's job in managing their paperwork at the end of their shift is to account for what hours are counted to each town so that we can manage that and schedule people appropriately.
Thank you.
Is that part of the reason why the hours of service don't actually add up? We're actually averaging less because you're spending more time in Westminster?
No, actually, that was a shortage in personnel. So we are behind in Putney on average over the life of the contract about 4 hours a week right now. So we are working on progressively stepping that back in to help essentially provide the service that you've already paid for.
Right. Okay.
It's also not uncommon that we have things like a fatality. Let's say it's a person who's outside snow blowing this winter, God forbid, but they're out snow blowing. They lose consciousness for some reason and they pass away. We've had calls like that in Putney. We respond. It requires more than just one officer. Right. So sometimes we'll bring in additional resources when the state police can't provide those resources. So it does balance out across the year, but sometimes we do see these fluctuations.
So you spent more time than the 40 hours in the first half of the year? Because right now we're looking like we're about 18 hours behind a week, 166 hours a month. So my calculations here.
Depending on when you're looking at, I'm looking at through today. Okay. So that might be already adjusted for.
Okay, all right, thank you.
My number would be about 16 hours a month. So we're in the same ballpark.
Okay, all right.
I have a couple questions. One, personnel shortages. Are you seeing anything promising as far as that's concerned, or is that just a reality? I mean, I know it's a reality sort of across the board, but are you feeling optimistic?
I actually am. So the shortages weren't for the reasons that have been an issue in the past. In fact, I've been fortunate enough to hire about 8 people this year. We did have another agency recruit away one of my officers. We had another officer who left law enforcement altogether. But net positive in hiring, it does take us time to train. So that is a component of it. But the real reason why we had a shortage in personnel is once the executive orders from the governor started relaxing, we saw all the work come all at the same time that was planned, normally starts in the springtime. So we went from what would normally be probably about 100 to 125% demand on personnel to about 150%. So with that comes, you lose people because they're getting sick, you lose people because they're calling out for whatever reason. And that's, we recognized it and we started working on ways to mitigate it as it started to happen.
Then my other question is, I'm just wondering how, the whole initiation of contracting with the sheriff's department was based on a number of years ago on really a community policing model. And I'm just wondering how you feel that quote unquote regionalization affects that. Are there pros and or cons to the concept of community policing in your coverage of 2 towns with sort of, for all practical purposes, with a single contract?
So Windham County is unique in that if you follow the valleys or the watersheds, you'll find roughly similar belief systems, philosophies. So to the point of, is there a detraction from community policing between Putney and Westminster? I don't think so. In fact, I think it reinforces it because you do have people who work in Westminster that drive from Putney, people who work in Putney who drive from Westminster. And so there's that sense of community regardless of the town line. If we were to start developing a regionalized model where we're connected to say the towns of Newfane and Townsend, they operate in different mentalities, so to speak. And so there's different values, different things that are important to them. That's where I think that we would see challenges. Because of the geographic nature, though, it tends to work out. The towns that can regionalize well are usually in the same valley. And so that has worked to our benefit, regardless of anything else. If I had the town of, let's say the town of Vernon said they want to join into the regionalized model, I don't think I could make it work with the towns of Putney and Westminster. And that's not because of politics, that's because of geography. I need to get them from Vernon to Putney and Westminster. So there's a efficiency factor to it. The nice thing with the deputies being co-located in both towns is that they're able to understand issues that follow Route 5, which are issues that affect both towns, as well as 91, though we're not dealing with enforcement on the interstate.
And then one more question sort of associated to that. My understanding is, and I may be totally misheard this, but that Dummerston is not currently contracting with you, is that correct?
They contract with me, yes.
They do. Okay, sorry. I heard that somewhere and I wasn't sure how that had come about. But, all right.
Mr. Fairman?
Yes, Mr. Fairman.
I wanted to thank Sheriff Anderson for his excellent explanation of how regionalization works. And as a native hereabouts, I'd never thought about the difference between the valleys. That's really interesting and definitely food for thought. But in that regard, I realize you may not want to answer this because it is a hypothetical question. I'm thinking perhaps Dummerston would be a logical partner with Westminster and Putney, but I don't know whether you can speak to that in any way.
I would agree in concept that they would be a good partner. If the town of Dummerston were prepared to have that conversation, I think my personal opinion is that would make sense. I could also see the town of Rockingham making sense. I am not aware of any active conversations of either town wanting to engage at that level right now. Not to say that they're not having it, I'm just not aware of it.
Unless there are any other questions on this subject, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about animal control.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and be succinct on this, and I'm happy to delve into anywhere, but I know you guys have several more things on your agenda, and Karen can speak more in depth to details if you need to expound, and I'm more than happy to join again. The problem, as I'm calling it, the problem statement is towns in Windham County are struggling with animal control. That's not unique to Putney. That's not unique to Dummerston, Newfane, Windham. I mean, I can pull towns across the county that there's a roller coaster effect of we have an animal control officer, we lose our animal control officer. Dummerston, ironically, when I first started this conversation, I said, hey, are you guys interested in this? And they said, no, we're good. And then they reached out 3 months later and said, we're interested. So the short history, my department used to engage in animal control services about 8 years ago. Due to a variety of logistical and legal issues, we found it difficult, if not impossible, to provide a good service to towns that didn't introduce liability either to the town, the department, or both. The history as it is, towns took on the responsibility outside of our department. They were hiring their own animal control officers. Their constables were taking over animal control. whoever that entity was, they were taking it on, which then came with a couple different issues that each town has run into. Some animal control officers weren't compensated, and so through that they said, this isn't worth it to me. When they would get phone calls in the early hours of the morning about a dog barking, and they have to go to work the next day. So that was one case. Another town, and this might be Putney, Karen, please keep me honest here. I believe that the animal control officer was getting called at their place of business or place of work, which is obviously for their employer, it's a conflict, which then creates another problem. And that person, I believe, chose to go with their livelihood than something that they were helping the town with, understandably. So the problem I have is that where over 20 towns in Windham County, let's say that even half want to have animal control services, each town wants to maintain local control, and understandably. But then I have to try and teach a person who's providing animal control 12 different versions and 12 different ordinances, and we have to make sure that those ordinances have been updated with statute change, that the particulars of one town's flavors, if you will, where it's different from another town, that they both are operating legally. So it creates a very layered demand on resources, legal resources, as well as department training resources to say, okay, the leash law in Putney is different than the leash law in Dummerston than it is in Westminster. How do we enforce that? So as this problem has continued on, the concept that we're coming up with is essentially to create a countywide animal control officer. And rather than say that the countywide animal control officer will provide individualized services to each town, rather going back to the concept of regionalization, we say, okay, what is it that each town has in their ordinance that is in common? So in this sense, we're somewhat triaging the animal control issues. And so every town is going to have a vicious animal portion. Every town's going to have registering animals. Every town's going to have animals at large. Those are all relatively similar responsibilities with similar liabilities. So there's no reason a town won't have those. Those are issues that we can train a person to do and that we can provision that out. So then the next part is funding it. The problem that I have with individual contracts, my personal opinion of the way we provide the policing services through contracts to towns, I don't like it. We've been doing it, people understand it, so we've continued with it, but I would like to change it over time. We're starting that premise with animal control. The simple fact is that I do have costs that are associated with the personnel and the equipment that goes into providing animal control, and I need that covered. And there needs to be a way to pay for that. Now, as a department, I don't have access to tax funding to provide animal control. There's no tax funding that does it. The only way I can do it is through a contract with a town who can do it through tax funding or whatever revenue sources there are. The idea here is by creating a consortium, I guess, for lack of a better word, of towns that are all willing to buy into this and funding it essentially through a mechanism that is fair to the towns in their own ways, we can provide a consistent service that covers those highest tier issues that every town has. And for the places where a town says, well, we like to have the ability to have a dog walked not on a leash, that town can still do that. It's just that leash control then falls under the responsibility of a town's designated animal control officer. So that solves the most difficult issues in animal control. The second part is that I have a 24-hour dispatch, and so that can serve as a call center, a clearinghouse, if you will, to take all the animal control complaints, and anything that we're going to triage to the animal control officer, they will go provide that service. Anything that falls onto the town's responsibility in animal control, we would then pass off to whoever that designee is at that point, and they can handle those issues. Things that I would foresee landing in the town person's responsibilities would be barking dogs. Some towns have ordinances saying if the dog's barking for X number of minutes, that's a violation of our ordinance. Not everybody wants that. So everybody's ordinance is different when it comes to the number of minutes. So things like that is something that the town could say, okay, this is something we care about. We keep it in our ordinance, and we'll find a resource to provide that. If the dog's barking at 2 in the morning, they call the sheriff's office, and we'll call Sally, the animal control officer, who will then follow up with it at 9 in the morning the next day to say, your dog was barking again. We have a recording, and put forth. My department's animal control officer can support the town's ACO in that process as well. We just won't be responsible for it.
Sounds good. Do you have any sense of a timeline?
Well, we really wanted to get a move on it because everyone's in budget season right now. So I think, assuming that everybody that's shown interest thus far is going to have their budgets in place for July 1st, I think July 1st.
Good.
Right.
I have a question. Do you need a certain amount of buy-in from a certain number of towns before this will go ahead?
So, great question. Technically, no, but this is where there's a sliding scale. So the fewer towns that participate, I still have the same problem, which is that I have the same cost, and so I need to pass that cost on. So originally, this conversation started as Putney and Westminster, which then it would have been I'm thinking of by population formula makes the most sense for funding it, but that's obviously part of what we're working on building right now. With Putney and Westminster, let's pretend it would have been roughly 50% to each town. As we brought in more towns, Dummerston, Newfane, and Wyndham have shown interest. And with animal control, I don't see the same geographic issues that we would see talking about community policing.
Because it's not such a time pressure, is that why?
It's not even so much about time. It's that animal control issues are more of an objective issue.
Okay.
If the car goes off the road, the car's off the road. It's not that there's nothing really that needs to be developed with that. Animal control officers, what we find is that a town might not have an issue with animal control for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then year 4, a family comes in with 10 dogs, 6 cats, and a partridge in the pear tree. And with all of that, all these animal control issues come through. And so this is a service that you might not have a call volume on year 1, year 2, or year 3. And then on year 4, you didn't budget for it, you didn't plan for it, and now you're getting hit in the face by it. So what we're looking to do is offset the cost to all the member towns by saying, look at this as something that you need to have going forward, but by partnering with everybody through regionalization, we reduce the cost to everyone, and then everybody knows that they have the service. It's kind of like insurance. You might not need it this year, but next year when you get in the crash, you're glad you had it. So with more member towns, we have it's a reduced cost to the town of Putney. When Karen and the group of us met earlier this month, that was 4 towns that were interested. Wyndham has since joined on, so that will be a further reduction. But there's upfront costs that will be necessary to get this off the ground. Fortunately, we have a lot of creative ways to minimize those as best as possible. And the other benefit here is what I'm essentially trying to develop is we have a membership into this entity. And so with assuming all 5 towns move forward with it, we have these 5 towns and they're the members. When other towns get hit in the face with, we have an animal control problem and we didn't plan for this, this entity can contract with them through my office, obviously, can contract with them and they'll pay a higher fee, which similar to raising funds for the town, if you have revenue into this program, it offsets what you need to raise by taxes. So there'd be about a 1-year lag. Each year we would know what actually truly happened, and so we could offset that. But moving forward, it would ultimately help fund itself.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, and I certainly would agree with your assertion that the intermittent nature of animal control problems has played out clearly in my time being involved in, but we won't see anything for a long time and then get slammed. That definitely happens. So good. We should keep moving if we can. So if people have any specific questions for Sheriff Anderson right now, great. I don't see anything in the chat. Otherwise, I think we will let you go and say thank you very much. And if we have any further questions related to budget or otherwise, we will be in touch.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Stay
You too.
safe.
Okay. So next we're on library preliminary budget questions. And that's just based on what we reviewed last time, Karen, whether there are questions that came as a result of that.
That's correct. So did any of the board have any questions on the library budget? David, you're muted. You're okay now.
Thank you. I see numbers down, but probably they're all because of COVID. Like book sales, people couldn't come, they couldn't do that. Printing, people can't come and use the library to do that kind of thing.
Right.
That's all COVID related. Salaries, it says 34,695, and they're budgeted for 105, and we're halfway through the year. Why is that so low?
Well, we had one person retire and
Okay.
we've had unemployment.
Okay, that's a good thing. I was just curious why. Yeah.
Yep.
Do you anticipate, Karen, that for the second half of the year, that's likely to return more to normal, or is the decreased service going to play out in significantly decreased salaries ongoing?
I predict that the library should have a significant surplus.
Yeah.
As well, possibly the town hall and the highway department. So,
Yeah.
I really don't see the library opening back up until after January, maybe February.
Yeah, or later.
It might be later, Josh. It's I can't predict it, but it doesn't look promising.
Anytime soon. No.
No.
The other thing I see is the digital content projection for 22 is way up because of COVID, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
from what you're seeing, the surplus should help offset that expense. So
Yes.
that's all I got.
Barry, you got any questions? All good for the moment? Okay. Well, if more come up, or, the nature of budget season is it goes around and around, so we can always come back and revisit anything that needs to be revisited. So, request to warn Medicare-for-All resolutions. Jane Katz Field. Jane, are you with us?
I'm not seeing her here, Josh.
She sent a letter and the warning, so I just read it all. She probably doesn't need to be here for it. For the request, I think the request is just she wants us to warn it.
Okay. As an article for town meeting, you mean?
That's what it looked like to me, yeah.
Okay. Right.
It's in our packet.
Sorry, I thought that was Alyssa talking. I've seen it. Yeah. So typically, as you both may or may not know, we have the option of putting articles on at our discretion, and or requiring, if we don't want to put them on as an article, then they can be petitioned. And I can't remember the exact number, but X number of signatures guarantees that an article gets put on regardless of whether the select board wants to or not. My experience, well, one, I think that is a little bit different this year. I know at least with elections, There is not a requirement for petitions this year, so I'm not sure how that's working with articles, but Mike, I don't know whether you.
Mike might be able to help us.
But also, I mean, my general experience with something like this is the nature of this is that it's a non-binding resolution. And there's little downside in something on an important issue like this to allowing it as an article just because it opens up a discussion for it. And, you know, as a non-binding issue, it's something that people can talk about and vote on, but it doesn't force anything to occur. And so I don't have a problem with putting this on as an article, but we don't have to make that decision right now.
Mr. Chairman.
As we get, hang on one sec, Mr. Fairman, as we get closer to town meeting day, we will want to consider that and also look at what the questions are related to how the recommendations for how articles get placed. Mr. Fairman, hang on a sec. I'm going to ask Mike Merwicki whether he wants to add anything to that. And if not, Mike?
Sure, thanks, Josh. One of the first bills we're going to take up this year is around town meeting. And there's a lot of towns who are wondering what to do and how to do it to maintain the health and safety of voters. And again, since they'll be voting the people who count the votes. My understanding is right now the select board could waive the signature requirements to put something if they wanted to. But I think there will be more, like I said, in that first bill, we're gonna, as soon as we've actually started work on it now. We've started to take testimony, and that first bill that'll come out of the legislature, we hope a couple of weeks into it, it'll be on the governor's desk, is around town meeting and how to run it this year. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we should find out, Karen, based on what you're saying, Mike, there must be some guidance either from the Secretary of State's office or from the governor's office as to the recommended approach at this time.
Yeah, I think there's been a memo that's gone out already from VLCT around this, and
Okay.
then there'll be some more specifics around whether you can move the date around. I think right now you do have the option, which Dummerston has chosen, to set town meeting to be just an Australian vote this year.
Right. Yeah, we already talked about that a little bit.
Some towns are looking for the flexibility of changing the date. For instance, last year Westminster started their town meeting in March, didn't finish the business that day, and was going to continue it the next week, and then everything shut down for COVID, so they finished the meeting in June. Not sure people want to wait to June, but some towns do want to move that, so we're trying to give them the flexibility they need.
Okay, that's good. Mr. Fairman?
Oops.
Did you call on me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. Coming back to the request to warn Medicare-for-All resolution and referring to the open meeting law, you've been discussing something, but the public do not know what it is. I request that the letter, and if there is a proposed warning article, that they be read aloud.
Do you want me to do that, Josh?
That would be great if you could, Barry. I would have to go off my screen in order to bring it up, so.
Yep, that's fine. So this was sent to the select board dated December 7, 2020. I am requesting the select board to warn an advisory resolution in support of a national single-payer healthcare system for the upcoming town meeting. With the increasing prevalence of COVID and the governor's restrictions on activities, it would be challenging and possibly dangerous to get signatures for a petition from town residents. Because of this, I'm appealing to you to warn this resolution so that the voters in Putney might have an opportunity to decide if they want to vote in favor of a resolution supporting the provision of health coverage for every citizen, regardless of their job, job, income, or health status. A Fox News election exit poll found that 72% of voters now favor Medicare for all, and I suspect that Putney residents may be even more supportive. The need for such a plan has been magnified since COVID-19 has caused many to lose their jobs and with them their employer-based health insurance. More than 50 municipalities have passed resolutions endorsing Medicare for all, including major cities such as Philadelphia, Detroit, Seattle, Minneapolis, Knoxville, and New Orleans. In New Hampshire, voters of Hanover, Grantham, Peterborough, and Holderness have all passed similar resolutions over the past year. Last month, the Vermont Medical Society, which represents 2,400 Vermont physicians and physician assistants, became the second state medical society in the U.S. to formally endorse a single-payer national health program. The issue of healthcare reform has an enormous impact on our town of Putney. Under a single-payer healthcare system, all our residents will be covered for medical needs in a comprehensive way with no out-of-pocket expenses. The health of our community will benefit tremendously under this system, and disparities will be lessened. Moreover, as pointed out in the resolution, our town will save $500,000 a year in healthcare expenditures for its employees. This is a figure I calculated based on the information I was able to gather from the town office and the supervisory union's business manager. I would like to make a brief presentation to the Select Board at its December 16 meeting to encourage you to place this resolution on the March town meeting ballot. Thank you for your time and consideration. Respectfully, Jane Katz, MD. So I don't know if she is here.
And do you have an actual copy?
Yes, I can read that.
Yeah, if you could read that also, please.
I just wanted to make sure Jane wasn't here because she said in the letter she wanted to present at this meeting. Okay, so this is the resolution. Request Select Board to warn this resolution for a vote at the 2021 town meeting of Putney, Vermont. Whereas every person in Putney, Vermont deserves high quality health care and everyone's health is at risk when our neighbors cannot receive care. And whereas rationing health care in the United States according to ability to pay has diminished the overall health of our citizens to the point that the US ranks 35th in the world in health outcomes and even worse for infant mortality and life expectancy, yet ranks first in healthcare costs. And whereas before the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of Americans without health insurance was nearly 30 million, with about 50 million Americans underinsured, the pandemic has greatly increased these numbers. For example, up to 45 million additional people have lost job-related health insurance, with the impacts most severe among our Black and brown neighbors. And whereas without new strategies, the never-ending rising costs of healthcare further challenge our already strapped municipal budget and our small businesses that keep our communities thriving. And whereas the Medicare for All Acts of 2019, HR 1384 and S 1129 would provide national health insurance for every person in the United States for all necessary medical care, including all primary care, hospital and outpatient services, dental, vision, hearing, maternity and newborn care, women's reproductive services, mental health, prescription drugs, and long-term care. And whereas the Medicare for All Acts of 2019 would provide coverage without copays, deductibles, or other out-of-pocket costs, and would slash bureaucracy, protect the doctor-patient relationship, and assure patients a free choice of clinicians without the restrictions imposed by private insurers. And whereas the Medicare for All Acts of 2019 would save millions in taxpayer dollars now spent on premiums that often provide inadequate health insurance coverage for government employees. And whereas in 2020, the town of Putney spent $604,000 on healthcare insurance premiums and other medical costs, but under improved Medicare for All, the only expense for healthcare would be an 8% payroll tax on employees' salaries, which would amount to approximately $95,000 a year, a savings of around $500,000 a year. And whereas the Medicare for All Acts of 2019 would result in the elimination of town and school district health insurance premiums and other medical costs and result in significantly lower property taxes for residents of Putney. And whereas the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act of 2020, HR 6906 and S 3790 will cover through Medicare the cost of COVID-19 related treatment for uninsured Americans, as well as all out-of-pocket costs for those with private or public public insurance until an FDA-approved COVID-19 vaccine is widely available to the public, and perhaps beyond that. And whereas the quality of life for the residents of Putney, Windham County will vastly improve because everyone would be able to get preventative and ongoing care in order to keep themselves and their neighbors healthy and avoid further burdening local resources. Whereas the ever-increasing costs of healthcare, which are further elevated due to the pandemic, may challenge our already strapped state and municipal budgets. Therefore, be it resolved that the town of Putney hereby endorses federal legislation which will provide universal comprehensive health coverage with zero cost sharing for all of our community residents during this crisis, such as the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Acts and beyond, such as the Medicare-for-All Acts of 2019. And be it further resolved that the town of Putney, Vermont calls on Senator Sanders and Leahy and Representative Welch to work vigorously toward the immediate enactment of this or similar legislation, thus assuring healthcare coverage as a basic human right for all Americans. I'm done.
All right. Alyssa, you have a question.
I actually have something to add because Jane is not here. She sent me something yesterday that, because her numbers were a little bit off here because I think she was including the school and we don't pay for the school. So she revised it and she sent it to me in an email, and I thought she would be here to give her revision. And it's, whereas in the upcoming year, the town of Putney will spend $197,000 on healthcare, not $604. That was the biggest change that I wanted to point out.
But so that's completely disregarding the healthcare of the school district. Is that correct, Alyssa? Do you know?
Right. That was just based on our healthcare.
Right. So I mean, I don't. It would be hard to tease out what the exact number is, but presumably her first number is a more realistic projection of what taxpayers in Putney actually pay for both town employees and school district employees, but without doing the math on that, it's hard for us to assure that. I think that the one caveat I would say to this is that people's, if there were a single payer system, and I would certainly be in favor of that, but that would be reflected in people's personal income taxes as well. So, what you might offset in your town taxes would be at least in part increased in your personal income tax. But I have not even a clue what the math on that would look like. And I don't think probably well, I'm sure some people do, but
the question really is just whether we want to warn this, right? I mean, we don't have to agree with all the numbers or even understand it. We just have to say, do we want to warn it?
Yes. And we don't have to make that decision right now. So I think we should all ponder that. And when we are putting together the warnings decide whether we want this to be an article. And again, the nature of it is that it would be non-binding. So it's essentially a statement from the town to say, we would like others to be working on this. All right. Well, thank you, Jane, for providing that. And we will consider it as we go forward. And we will also take under advisement the state's guidance on how to adopt articles. All right. Discussion of Putney Public Pool fundraising. Karen, we're pretty far behind time. I mean, it's been a long meeting. So I know this is important and we want to talk about it. My take home from the VLCT information you shared is that essentially we can be a vehicle for fundraising. It's just important to consider the nature of this. Why this is on here is because there has been discussion about whether residents of Putney, or not even just residents of Putney, whether people could take on a fundraising effort for the purpose of doing repairs on the pool, which are in the realm of $130,000.
Yeah.
And whether we could be a fundraising partner in that, essentially. And the answer is yes. There are guidelines as to exactly how that would have to be done. Funds would have to be very clearly designated and tracked, not surprisingly, but the town could act as the organizer of fundraising for that. I think that it would be my hope that somebody or a group of people would take this on as an effort and try and work on it sort of in partnership with the town, as opposed to asking the town to do it as a fundraising effort. But Karen, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I have one person that's interested in doing a campaign to raise money and get donations. I've had several people walk up to me and say, hey, I want to donate to the pool. I would love to have Alyssa Harlow on in this group, because she is the assistant treasurer. So she will be aware of donations. I think it's important to have a small group. That way we can campaign it and hopefully have the funds so we can have the pool repaired first thing in the spring and reopen it for the summer.
Sounds good. So do we, I see David has a question, but do we need to take any action tonight, Karen? Or I mean, I guess my feeling would be, if the sense of the board is that it sounds like a good idea to try and undertake fundraising for this, that we should allow Karen to pursue avenues that she has seen or that have come to her for that possibility.
Yeah, and we should get started now and not wait.
Yeah.
The other thing too, Josh, is if we can raise approximately 130,000, that would be a good thing. But if we can't, we're going to have to look to fund the rest of the repair. So it's best to get started now.
David, did you want to add something?
No, I was going to ask the question you asked. I don't think we have to make a motion. Do we have to do any of that? We don't. And I know I'm definitely for this. I'd love to be the first person to contribute. And I think fundraising like this, especially in times like COVID, are a great way to offset how things are hard. The people who can contribute. And it's, I think this is a great thing, great cause. So
yeah, I think also, we've obviously had the fees for the pool, et cetera, but we could have had a reserve fund for the pool and been fundraising for many years for this effort. And we should just keep that in mind, looking forward, that this should be something, because the pool always is going to need repairs and is going to need a major rehab every once in a while. So I think it would be great to undertake a fundraising effort related to this. But I also think it would be nice if there was a, whether it was a pool funding committee or something like, not necessarily a town entity, but a group of people who were interested in having that as an ongoing mission. That would be great.
All right.
I agree with that.
Mr. Chairman, question, when I may.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Fairman.
If the funding doesn't happen and therefore the work doesn't happen, can the pool reopen this summer?
No. We really, there are significant issues with the pool that have to be addressed. And we got quotes from a handful of different companies last year and proposals for different ways to approach it. And it's pretty clear that it really needs a major facelift before it can reopen. So I think what Karen was referring to is, if we're unable to raise those funds through fundraising, how would we as a select board look at that in how we would fund it? So hopefully fundraising would be very successful.
I'm hoping.
So Karen, yeah, unless anybody else has anything else to add, yeah, see what you can figure out and see what the best mechanisms for making it happen are. And,
Okay.
I think we're all probably willing to try and help figure out how to make it move forward.
All right, thank you.
Excuse me, Karen, may I say something?
Yes.
Eva.
Go ahead.
This is very simple-minded, but when we started the community supper group, I went to River Valley Credit Union. They told me, yeah, we have a fund for projects like, the community suppers. I mean, I don't know how big their fund is, but for community projects. And
Okay.
went to the paper mill. The paper mill said, oh yeah, we'd be happy to help. I think there are businesses that would be willing to step forward even during this time of pandemic.
Thank you, Eva, for that information.
And also, I just want to say that Oak Meadow School has moved here to Putney. They've
Yeah.
totally moved everything to Putney. And
Yeah.
they deal with young people in the learning situation. And I would think it would be a good thing for them to, and they have children, young children. The people that work there have young children. So, and many of them live in Putney. So just an idea, throwing that out.
Thank you for all that information, Eva. And also, you may have already looked into this, Karen, but we should certainly also explore whether there's grant money available.
No grant money, Josh, I already looked into it. We can get a USDA loan. I'd
Yeah.
rather not do that at this moment.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna work towards the fundraising, see what happens, and
Go from there.
yeah.
Sounds good. All right, let's see. So you had an addition to our agenda, which was Energy Committee appointments.
Right, and I had an email, but I don't have it with me, and I apologize for that. It's gonna be on my desk, but
Table till next week or till our next meeting.
yeah, I know the Energy Committee wants to get started because there's some tasks right now that they want to jump into. I mean, I have Eileen Shute, Lionel Shute, and Alan Blood that have shown interest. Eileen and Lionel both sent me an email to express their interest. Morgan Casella is still on that committee.
Okay.
And I've talked to two other people. One used to be on the committee. He may come back. So we definitely got to get this committee up and going. There's a lot of state deadlines that are coming up that we have to comply with. And just talking about the fire station, I think this would be a good group to suss out what's going on down there.
Yeah.
What needs to happen in order for this committee to get online?
Just, I have their email at my office. Hang on a minute, I might be able to pull it up here.
They're been an ongoing committee, Dara. So, I think that, ultimately we would need to appoint them, appoint people to this committee.
Okay.
I think that if we were to, again, sense of the board is that, that we would like to reconstitute the Energy Committee and that Karen should encourage people who are interested or we should encourage people who are interested to submit a letter of interest and we would look at appointing people.
Can we just say that now that we're encouraging people and then Karen will receive whatever she receives and then we'll revisit this again?
Sounds good.
Great. Okay.
So I have an email from Lionel and I have one from Eileen right now.
So I don't know whether you want to, I mean, I'm not sure, do we, well, do we want to appoint them to the Energy Committee, or do we want to, I guess my feeling would be, let's make a statement here and now, as Bara has just done, saying, you know, let's bring the Energy Committee back, and interested people should send Karen a letter. And it sounds like Lionel and Eileen are likely to be high on that list of those who will be working towards that goal.
So I wonder if we want to say, as you said, we want this committee to come back online. Anybody who's interested should communicate with Karen by December what, so that we can decide on December 30th who we're going to appoint.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that, but we can also, you know, if it comes back online and there are others, we can appoint at any time. So I agree with you. I mean, please, if you're interested, send a letter of interest soon. And or if you hear about this in 2 weeks and you're interested, we can appoint at any time that that people come forward for it.
And does the committee themselves choose a chair, or do we have anything to do with that?
They choose chair. You know, one thing that Karen and I have certainly spoken about is that the nature of this committee, well, the nature of any committee, is that somebody really needs to sort of grab the bull by the horns, and it sounds like maybe Eileen and Lionel are interested in doing that. But there needs to be good structure and a chair who's willing to take on that responsibility and really make it happen, because this is an example of a committee who, when it's had a good chair, it has been a high functioning committee. When it hasn't, it hasn't. And of course, that's the nature of committees. So, but thank you to Lionel and Eileen for their interest.
Yes.
All right, so that brings us to town manager report, Karen. I don't know whether we've been making Mike wait forever. Well, and we have others, but.
It's only going to take me 2 minutes.
Okay.
So all I'm going to do is read it. So town meeting preparation, the Community Service Award request was put on iPutney, and that is due December 28th, 2020. And Bara, do you know what that is?
Yes.
Okay. And then town meeting preparation, town report dedication. The select board needs to think about this, and on December 30th, we'll have an executive session to discuss candidates. Equity and inclusion training update. So I met with Dottie Morris and Mary Gannon, and I sent the board the schedule for training. So basically what will happen, it'll be all virtual. There'll be breakout groups. Dottie and Mary will be screen sharing. I don't believe, the only concern is accessibility. And then whether the weather will be participating as well, because if the highway department's, you know, dealing with a snowstorm, they're not going to be in a training, and vice versa for the fire department. So Dottie and Mary are going to put together a survey that each employee will have to fill out. It's confidential and anonymous. And once they get those back, we'll see those surveys by the end of the month. Once they get those back, then they'll start preparing for the training. Was there any questions about training schedule? Okay, moving on. Mowing and landscape service bids are due December 18th of this month, and the 1988 Ford fire truck bids are due December 28th. We've already gotten 2 bids on that. Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for January 5th, 2021 at 7 p.m. I will be warning that meeting for the select board because you will need to be in attendance.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Karen? I missed that.
Planning Commission meeting
Oh, okay. Thank you.
scheduled for January 5th, 2021 at 7 p.m. They're going to be discussing the solar projects that are proposed in Putney.
Yep.
So I will warn a select board meeting for that same date because I'm asking the board to be at that meeting.
Sounds good.
Because the planning commission has to approve the projects and then the select board has to do the same.
So can you just say the date and time again? January 5th?
January 5th, 7 p.m.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My last bit of information, and I lost, oh, here it is. So we are receiving holiday cards, but I wanted to mention that we received a holiday card from Simon Operations Services, who are our wastewater treatment plant contractors. Normally they bring like 1 or 2 trays of cookies every year. But this year, in lieu of holiday cookies this year, we will be making a charitable donation to your local food shelf. Happy holidays. So I thought that was very nice of them to do that. And I wanted to acknowledge that.
Good. Well, thank you to them.
You're welcome. That's all I have.
It occurs to me, Karen, but we haven't talked about this, but of course, usually at this time of year, any day now, we would be having a gathering at Town Hall for a holiday party.
Yes.
Obviously, we won't be doing that, so
No.
but maybe we should try and think a little bit about maybe, at the start of the new year, having a Zoom something, or, who knows? I don't know. Something to think about.
Okay.
But just a time for people to sort of get together and chat if they want to.
Sounds good.
All right. So that brings us, thank you, Karen. That brings us to other business. Mike, broadband consolidation or Consolidated Communications status update. I don't know. I don't think you're likely to do a Consolidated Communications status update, but you might give us a little bit of an update on the CUD and or other things.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. I do have a little bit of an update for that, but if I could take a minute beforehand, I could update you a little bit on some things that were mentioned before. There was a little talk about what's happening at the state level with our budget and whether there'll be funds coming down. We've, of course, been preparing already for the start of the January session, and one of the first things we heard from was our state economist. And somewhat of an anomaly right now that our revenues are actually ahead of schedule from what we thought we would be. And a lot of that is due to the stimulus money that's come in from the federal government, over $1 billion. There's still a projection that by year's end, we will be looking at a deficit, and what he's suggesting is about 2.5%. So it's not the kind of deficit that'll choke a horse, but any deficit is a problem. So we'll need to be careful. But I say that because when we're looking at broadband, one of the pieces that we're going to have to do is come up with some money. What I'd like to include in this, though, is we're preparing for the legislature. One of the other things the economist shared with us is that a healthy population is a healthy economy, and that there are nations around the world right now that have hardly had their economy touched because they have done the work to secure their people, the health and safety. Countries like Taiwan, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a city about the size of New York, and to date, they've had 123 deaths from COVID because they learned what to do from the 2004 SARS outbreak. And one of the things Vermont has been doing very well has been following the health and safety protocols, the masking, the distancing. And, one of the tragedies we're all looking at right now as legislators was the recent death of the New Hampshire speaker from COVID. And the reports that we're hearing is that he wasn't following protocols. He was in parts of meetings where many people became infected, including him. And the tragedy of it is might have been a preventable death. And it's a reminder that Vermont is doing well, and I hope we continue to do well for the health and safety of our people and for our economy. That correlation between a healthy population and the health economy is not lost on us. So I think it'll make our recovery that much better. And coming around to broadband, we know we're going to have to spend money. We've identified it's about a $300 million problem statewide for us to put in place a plan that'll cover to every address in Vermont. We're confident that the new president recognizes that there's a critical mass of people across Congress. This is not a partisan issue, who recognize that broadband is essential for the 21st century life. So we're hoping we're going to make some big progress here. Now locally, I've had conversations. I've attended one of the Deerfield Valley Fiber meetings. I've had conversations with someone at Consolidated, and I think there's some options here. However, to get more specific, I think a next step would be to get some concrete numbers from Consolidated, and I think that would have to come with a request from the Selectboard on behalf of the town to have Consolidated, if they want to do something, put some numbers in writing. I think they're serious. Talking to Patrick Moreland at Brattleboro, Assistant Town Manager, they've let Brattleboro know they're going ahead with an expansion in Brattleboro, a fiber expansion. And one of the things that the CUD is looking at is maybe even hiring Consolidated as a vendor, since they might be able to expedite the hanging of the line, since they already have pole access. So moving ahead, I think as the legislature convenes, we're going to make some good progress, and hopefully on the town level, we can put something together. But my suggestion to you as the select board is to make that formal request to Consolidated that if they are serious, and I think they are, I think they're very serious about expanding their fiber, their cable network, that let's get some hard numbers and see what they're really talking about.
Do you think, Mike, it was clear from their presentation that they have a clear sense of what they think we need. Is it worth having, before we invite them or ask them for some numbers, would it be worth having a clearer sense of what we think we need? Or do we, I don't know, just your take on that.
Yeah, I think they have that information. The CUD has that information. The state has that information on what the needs are. The information's out there. It's not put together in a easily digestible form right now, but that information I think is easily available. And my guess is if they put a proposal together, it would be part of that. I don't think it would hurt to have them put a proposal together, because I think one of the things you're going to want to do is have the town lawyer take a look at it too, to make sure we're not exposing ourselves in a way that we will be detrimental to the finances of the town. From what they're saying, they're not. But again, until it's in writing, I don't think
Yeah.
we want to just go on conversation.
Yeah, no, and it might be worth having them put together, essentially a preliminary proposal, a proposal of what a proposal would look like, kind of thing. And we probably would want to write that up as some variation on an RFP so that we could, because Comcast should be invited the same, and then I don't know whether there are other capable or interested parties, but it would probably want to be as an RFP.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Fairman.
Representative Murwicki has offered some excellent ideas about how to proceed. You raised the question, I suppose rhetorically, of what do we need? We need broadband internet access available to every residence and business in the town of Putney. That's the nature of the world nowadays. And I'd like to mention very briefly something else. I was reading somewhere in the Vermont News, Christine Hallquist, who is now the executive director of the CUD up in the Northeast Kingdom area. She commented that what they should start out with is the areas that can throw off sufficient revenue to cover their costs, to which I would say we should not do that. What we should do is charge enough to cover the cost for everyone to have service. And maybe some people have to pay a bit more, but everyone gets service. And that's exactly how it works with roads. And broadband internet is now as essential as roads.
Yeah, I think the difference is that as we see with electricity compared to roads, I'm not disagreeing with you, but these are privatized organizations that are looking to provide it. Unless we are interested in being our own union district, which is sort of the concept of the CUD, then it's a slightly different model. But I agree with you. I also agree that what we need on the surface is definite, well, or in depth is definitely obvious, and that is internet everywhere. But what that really looks like, I guess we put together the process of putting together an RFP of sorts would open that conversation somewhat to what exactly we would be looking for. Emily has her hand up. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah. I'm really happy to hear Mike talking about fiber to premises because the fiber to premises are infinitely more safe for people's health than the proposed 5G that's going up around the country. I do believe, and I'm just saying this on belief and information, that Wi-Fi per se has been recently classified as a Class B carcinogen. I don't have all the particulars about it, but I do believe that we will need and want to look at the health effects of too much time on Wi-Fi. And again, we can hardwire the schools. They're already doing it in France. If we can hardwire our own homes rather than direct from the Ethernet through this fiber to premises, that would do ourselves a service in the future. I don't think it's really widely understood right now what the health effects of Wi-Fi are, but they will become evident going forward. So I just wanted to put that thought out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else have anything to add? Well, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I guess we just need to figure out what the next steps are and take them on.
Just conclude, Josh, this is something Court Trowbridge and I have been working on together. She had a conflicting meeting tonight, or she would have been here. I just wanted to thank her for the work and time she's been putting in on this as well. And she recently talked to somebody in Dublin, New Hampshire, who's gone through a build out with Consolidated, and it's doing what they said it would. So I think there's some promise ahead there.
Good. Good. Well, thank you. And thank you, Cor, also. All right, so next on our list, face masks. Emily. You're on mute.
Later. Do you need to unmute me?
No, now you're good.
I'm here. Thank you. I'm going to just begin not with face masks per se, although as many of you know, I have been the target of some pretty unpleasant comments for choosing a different path based on what I believe is sound science. But I want to begin my time now, and I think I'll probably be coming to future meetings. I hope to be able to tell when more clearly how long they last. So I want to bring everybody's attention to the VSA 20, Section 13, on termination of emergencies, and subsection 3 is a section that says, upon receiving notice that a majority of the legislative body of a municipality affected by a natural disaster no longer desires that the state of emergency continues within its municipality, shall declare the state of emergency terminated within that particular municipality. And I think when they say a natural disaster, they're including an all hazards event, which also means disease related. Upon the termination of the state emergency, the functions as set forth in Section 9 of this title shall cease, and the local authorities shall resume control. And I know I'm just going to take the position that everybody on the board and everybody present is very far from that point of view. And I don't want to exhaust our time this meeting, but I want to begin to bring forward some important issues about the state of emergency and how it's been rolling out. I want to remind everybody that within Vermont, people have a 99.99% chance of surviving COVID, 99.98 elsewhere. So I just want to remember to keep that part in perspective. And as we heard earlier from Mark, that the calls to mental health have increased, what is that, fourfold? Since in 6 months they had as many as they had in 2 years. I also have the report just came in for the deaths of opioid-related deaths, and that total is 25% higher than the 3-year average. We don't have all the numbers in, but I guess right now I want to introduce to you some of the information that's really perplexing to me that's coming out of the Department of Health. And then after that, I'll just give you an invite and let it rest for this meeting, because I know I'm bringing in a different perspective. We sent out a FOIA request to the Department of Health, and we asked 10 questions. And the 10 questions were, and I'm going to read them to you because I think they are important questions. The first question was, a list of the Vermont experts and their complete credentials from whom the governor is establishing his protocols and making his COVID-19 decisions. Number 2, a list of health experts outside of the state of Vermont and their complete credentials from whom the governor is establishing his protocols and making his COVID-19 decisions. Number 3, all documents that had examined the adverse reactions and harms of the expected COVID-19 vaccines. And I will add right here that people who have any sort of allergies are not supposed to take these vaccines, and they kept those people out of the trials. Leave the rest of that for later. Number 4, all documents that examine the adverse reactions and harms of a flu shot, and documents that explain the plans for care and compensation of those who experience adverse reactions to the COVID-19 vaccine. and all documents that explain the plans for care and compensation for those who experience adverse reactions to the flu. As many of you know, the flu shot has as its first potential harm anaphylaxis and death. So there are people who are going to die from taking the flu shot. I don't know the numbers or the percentage, but I think it's important that we don't just gloss over these things as we rush to mass take a vaccine that has, for an illness that we have 99% chance of surviving, number one. Let me go on. All documents regarding the methods of distributing COVID-19. All documents and notes from meetings discussing the possible mandate. Now, here's the one that I really want you to listen to. Number 9. All documents and notes from all meetings discussing protocols of treating COVID-19 with azithromycin, budesonide, hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and other therapeutics. We now know that ivermectin is being hailed by those in medicine as a miracle for COVID. So if we could have been preventing harm all along, but have not, that's very important to begin to think about. And the last one, all documents and notes from meetings pertaining to the Departments of Health's relationship with Vermont press, media, and any opposing opinions on the governor's COVID-19 protocols. So in response to these 10 questions, we received practically the same answer for each one. The health department does not possess records responsive to this request. That's very troubling. That number one, we have so many alternative therapies that are preventative, and they have not any records of looking into them. That's as much as I want to bring you today. I'll bring you some when is the next meeting, please?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. What day is that, please? Wednesday,
December 30th.
Okay, December 30th. And are your meetings always this long? I mean, could I come in at 7 and?
We hope they're not always this long, but they tend to be.
Yeah, I couldn't concentrate because I had a lot to do.
We're trying to get budgets approved so we can.
Yeah, I feel for you guys. I'm really impressed with your patience with it all. So what we're doing is we're beginning to organize a people's inquiry where we hope that we can look deeper into the issues. There's been a lot of things coming out about the PCR test, and it has been shown, and its issues. I don't want to go too long here because I have reams of things I could go into, but I would I'd like to ask people here, all of you, we will be looking to put together a people's inquiry, which will be conducted by Zoom. We will have experts that will come, and we don't want people all necessarily of one point of view. We want people who will be wanting to listen and ask pertinent questions, and we specifically want a set of people who will commit to a whole series. I think it's going to be 6 or 7 series of topics. The first one starting with the PCR test, and commit to writing a report at the end. So this inquiry will be, of course, uploaded to all the cable accesses that we can, and also, to BitChute and all these other places. So we'd love to have a representative from Putney who would ask and listen and report out. So I'm just putting that on the table. And let's see, I guess that's what I wanted to start by bringing today. I can send you different, copies of these things that I'm talking about. but I do feel like it's important that you are aware of things like this. Like
Can
I
I
could
just-
send you, sorry, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to thank you for sending, I didn't watch the video that was an hour and 40 minutes long because I just didn't, but I watched the other two videos that you sent, the Dr. Lyons Wheeler and the Dr. Corey, and those were very interesting. So I just wanted to thank you for sending those.
You're welcome. If it was the, what is it, the thing that I have on the back of my car, it's the highwire.com. That show actually is generated by a man who used to be on The Doctors on CBS. And he was doing quite well there until he came into a topic that they weren't going to cover because of Big Pharma. And that's what initiated 4 years, him breaking off and bringing some of his other CBS producers and making a nonprofit, also a legal nonprofit, to begin to investigate. So it is, that one is 140 some, he once a week comes out with like that much, and I take it in portions. You know, I just take it a little bit, but he's excellent. He gives his resources, and it just, you know, information is important, and it's been particularly hard to share it in these times.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Fairman.
the speaker claims that the survival rate of COVID-19 coronavirus is 99.1%. Therefore, the mortality rate is 0.1%. The actual mortality rate over the population is 1%. But the problem is it increases drastically with age. For example, for people in my age group, I'm 78, the mortality rate is 8%, and the older we get, the higher it goes. It goes up as high as 20%. Okay, so 80% survive, but 20%, in my case, 8% of my age group died a horrible death. So it is not quite as, well, first the figure is wrong, and second, one must address the overall demographics in order to have any sense of what's going on here.
Thank you. Emily, you want to respond briefly?
Hi, thanks. I'm going to come back another time. I don't want to get into an argument right now, but I certainly would invite the person who just spoke to become one of the member of the People's Inquiry and to show up and bring these issues forward. I am absolutely interested in people understanding the issues with the PCR test and the ramifications there. I have been waiting to talk and come on for several hours now, and my partner just got back. We haven't had dinner yet, and if there's any, if there's anything anybody wants to ask, and I can give my email out to I don't know who talked just then.
Howard Fairman.
Oh, hi, Harold. How are you? You're here with us. So at any rate, Howard, you should be getting you should be getting therapeutics, and I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak that way, but from the evidence out there, there are excellent preventatives, and that's part of the issue that the health department, that I'm bringing forward, that the health department is not looking at. All right?
Mr. Chairman, I would request, I must say that I will not be patronized in this situation. I am fully familiar with the science involved here. I also have some of the finest physicians in the country advising me. So I'm not sure I will take any advice from someone who says that she is not a doctor.
I wasn't offering any advice. I said I wasn't because I was a doctor, and let's try to be respectful. On that, I've had enough disrespect all around anyway. So I'm going to thank you for take me, and I'll see if there's any other questions, and I will join you again next time. Shall I do the same thing, send an email?
Yes, to Karen. Karen and I work together to put the agenda together.
All righty. So I'll just let you, think about it, and you can certainly email me things. And I wish you the best and the happy Christmases and candle burnings and solstices.
Same to you. Thank you so much, and we will see you again.
Thank you very much. Good night now.
Good night. Okay, so we've been on for quite a while. We're on to financial health of Putney, and Mr. Fairman, I don't know how much you want to present. I would say, I know that you had mentioned last time that you were looking to sort of reconcile numbers between you and Ethan Allen Institute, I think it was. Sorry if that's wrong, if it's just the town, but essentially the town's analysis and your own analysis. And I just want to point out that I think we all are in agreement that that sort of regardless of how you define it, a position of I'm blanking on the term that they used in assessing us, distress. That we all are in agreement that we can and should take steps to improve our circumstances. So I'm happy to have you let us know what you came up with, but also just being clear that we're all in agreement. So, Mr. Fairman, you got anything to, what would you like to tell us?
Okay, I shall. It's very brief. So with reference to our public discussion during the December 2nd, 2020 Town of Putney Select Board meeting regarding the Town of Putney's fiscal health, I promised to reconcile my scoring and the Astley, Babbitt, Fleming, Stearns scoring of the Town of Putney's fiscal health per the Ethan Allen Institute's Towns in Trouble Assessing Municipal Fiscal Health in Vermont and our audited financial statements. I afterward encountered Selectman Babbitt while we were out and about, who asked that we postpone further fiscal health discussion during this meeting because you are burdened with budget reading, so I agreed. I also have been asked whether I will work privately with others regarding the Town of Putney's fiscal health. I will not. I prefer to work publicly under the Vermont Open Meeting Law regarding taxing and spending of Town of Putney taxpayers' money. Here, briefly, is some food for thought. Vermont statutes provide no legal standard for municipal government accounting. Unfortunately, the lack of a common standard has resulted in a wide variation in accounting practices among Vermont municipalities. Vermont municipalities' accounting must be audited annually by elected town auditors, if any, or Vermont licensed public accountants. Auditors audit each Vermont municipality for compliance with its accounting practices instead of full compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. So there are no common metrics for comparing Vermont municipalities' fiscal health. Agreeing that the Town of Putney's fiscal health is questionable, showing that fiscal health metrics proposed by Towns in Trouble are vague, we shall improve them. That's it.
That sounds like we're in agreement.
Thank
We're in
you, Howard.
agreement as far as pursuing this goes, sure.
Yes.
Well done, Howard. Thank you.
Yeah. No, and I think that you know, the metrics involved in this are complicated, as you point out. So how we assess it on an ongoing way, I'm not sure, but maybe pushing our auditors specifically to or being very, very pointed in our questioning of those auditors as to how we approach it. So the audit.
Sorry.
Karen, you just got the draft not too long ago, so we'll be going through that and certainly your input on that and any queries about that.
Right. I wanted to comment too that I will have the auditors in our January 13th meeting.
Okay.
Because we always have them speak to the board about findings and, this is a new company, as we all know. So we had less than a handful of journal entries that we had to make, which is always a good thing. And once I get through the draft, and I'm gonna shoot it off to the select board as well. I'm just waiting on a couple more steps that we have to complete. And once they're completed and I get a second drop back, it'll be ready for December 30th meeting.
Sounds good. All right. As far as I know, that's everything we need to do. Executive session?
Not this evening.
No. Okay. So our next meeting date, as we have discussed, is December 30th. And, you know, often at that time of year, we sometimes suspend our meeting for a week, but I think given that nobody's likely to be traveling and that we have plenty to do,
Right.
unless either of you object, I think the 30th is okay with me.
Yeah, fine with me.
Fine
Okay.
with me.
Excuse me.
Yes, Eva.
Yes, I would like to recommend that the board and the town manager read the comments that came out today, section C, the viewpoint, the front page article. And I want to say that I'm grateful for the select board and the town manager. When you read that article, yeah, I'm interested in a 5-member select board. Just, I'd like to, I don't know how that, I don't have the skill to put that together as that request. I don't know how to do that, but I would like to have some help with that down the road. So thank you all for your good work, and that's it.
All right. Thanks, Eva.
Thank you, Eva.
Okay. If there isn't anything else, motion?
Motion to adjourn.
I
There you
second
go.
the motion.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.